Freedom Street. Oh Lord, Freedom Street. Everybody knows we gonna walk, we gonna walk. Walk, walk, walk down Freedom Street. Everybody knows we gonna talk. Tell the whole wide world down Freedom. As we go walk and slow. Walk, we gonna walk, we gonna talk. Walk, we gonna walk.
In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with Jah, and the Word was Jah. In the beginning, Jah created the heaven and the earth. He then created man of his own likeness. Gave unto man wisdom, knowledge, and understanding.
Jah is my help and my strength, so shall I fear. He's a shield upon my right and my left hand, so whom shall I be afraid? Jah is my king. Jah is my light and my salvation, so whom shall I fear? He's my guide throughout this creation, so whom shall I be afraid? Jah is my king. Jah is my guide in my resting and my rising, so whom shall I fear? He's my guide when I step out and forward in, so whom shall I be afraid? Jah is my king. Jah is my guide when Philistines come down upon me, so whom shall I fear? He's my guide when my enemies come to devour me, so whom shall I be afraid? Jah is my king. Jah is my guide from the pestilence of darkness.
So Thomson and Irving, so that we can turn your mic off, so that, and then when I introduce you, then you'll turn on your mic, So Thomson, when I start, you'll turn off your mic, and then when I introduce you, turn it on, so we'll feedback,
Jah is my king. Jah is my Jah is my health and my strength. So whom shall I fear? He is a shield upon my right and my left hand. So whom shall I be afraid? Jah is my king.
The Global View on Q, the big station. Insights into where the people of Dominica and the Caribbean came from, understanding our past, embracing our present, charting the way forward into our future. Together, eliminating poverty, embracing justice, peace, and togetherness. The Global View on Q, networking Dominica with the rest of the world. The experts are in the house. From Dominica, Canada, the Caribbean, the United States, Europe, Asia, and the rest of the world. Engaging all Dominicans at home and abroad on our agriculture, our economy, our foreign relations, our justice system, our governance, our international competitiveness, our education, our world-class festivals and entertainment, sports, politics, regional cooperation, and much more. Globally positioning Dominica within the Caribbean. Join the conversation on the Global View on Q. Tune in, call us, have your say. The Global View on Q, only on Q95, the big station.
Good evening, and a very, very warm welcome to you in Radio Land at home and abroad. This is the Global View on Q. I'm your host, Sheridan Gregoire, Mr. G. It's Tuesday, 19th April, 2022. Just about, 7:39 in the studios at Q95, the big station. It's the 14th Tuesday of 2022, and delighted again tonight to have my distinguished guest, Dr. Irving Andre, and economist and financial consultant, Dr. Thomson Fontaine. This is the final episode in our historic series on the leadership, the performance, and the legacy of Dominica's political leaders and their administrations. As we recall, Dominica's second Prime Minister, O.J. Serafin, joined us when we discussed his era in office, and Dominica's fourth Prime Minister, Edison James, joined us last week to discuss and defend his UWP era in office. And tonight we had invited Prime Minister Skerritt to be here with us, but I have not received any response from him. And it is unfortunate, I believe, that he probably is not taking the advantage of this opportunity to accept our invitation to join us tonight to discuss and to defend the ongoing 17 years of his performance, his leadership, and his legacy. And that of this is DLP administration to date. Of course, in the interest of fairness, I did put out some talking points when we did this with O.J. Serafin and when we did it with Edison James last week. And I'm using the same talking points tonight because we're really looking at the history and the legacy. We really treading the same footpath, going through and using the same yardstick to measure all the performances and the leadership and the legacies of all of our leaders. So here's the thing. Our historic leadership series continues tonight with the spotlight on the performance, on the leadership and the legacy of Dominica's fifth, sixth, and seventh prime ministers, who would be Roosevelt Douglas, Pierre Charles, and Roosevelt Skerritt, and the era of their DLP administrations. We do so tonight because we know that Prime Minister Roosevelt Douglas had a very short time in office, and Prime Minister Pierre Charles also a short time in office. And they all were part of the same DLP administration. So we thought we could do it that way tonight. So we continue to take an in-depth look and compare the eras of Dominica's political leaders and their administrations over the years. And tonight we examine and compare the performance, the leadership, and the legacies of former Prime Ministers Edison James for 4.5 years that he remained in office, Rosie Douglas just under 1 year, Pierre Charles just about 3 years, and then Prime Minister Roosevelt Skerritt for 17 years and more is ongoing. So Edison James, Rosie Douglas, Pierre Charles, Roosevelt Scarrett. Who are they? How long did they remain as a leader of Dominica? How will we describe their style of leadership? Were they unifiers or dividers? What did their administrations accomplish in their years in office? What about the state of the economy and the society under their administration? Did they create significant jobs or housing or infrastructure or foreign earnings? What was the state of democracy during their tenure? Did they respect, uphold, and conform to the laws and the constitution of Dominica? How do they really compare? Were their administrations corrupt? Did they practice big government or small prudent government? Did they spend too much state resources on themselves and on their personal security details, for example? What were the major pillars of the economy during their era? Was there resilience and sustainability of the people, the natural environment, and the architectural heritage in their time? Was there peace, justice, unity, harmony, and well being among Dominica's Afro Caribbean and Kalinago brothers and sisters at home and abroad during their tenure in office? What are the legacies of former Prime Minister Edison James? And we looked at that last week. What are the legacies of former Prime Minister and his European administration? We looked at that last week. And of course, we also has the same question of Prime Minister Rosie Douglas and his DLP administration, and also of Prime Minister Pierre Charles and his DLP administration. And how does their performance, all three of them, Edison James, Roosevelt Douglas, and Pierre Charles, how does their leadership, their performance, and legacy compare with that of Prime Minister Roosevelt Scarrett and his current DLP administration? Is Mr. Scarrett doing the right thing by the youth who will always be the leaders and movers and shakers of the future? We asked the same question of Mr. O.J. Serafin and of Mr. Edison James as well when they were with us. So please stay tuned to Q95, the big station. My distinguished guest, Dr. Irving Andre, economist and financial consultant, Dr. Thomson Fontaine, will compare the performance, the leadership, and the legacy of Dominica's immediate past three prime ministers, that's Edison James, Rosie Douglas, and Pierre Charles, and the era of their administrations with that of current Prime Minister Roosevelt Scarrett and his DLP administration. We will, of course, discuss the good, the bad, the ugly, and the dangerous, and I'm sure we'll do that with the inputs from you, our callers, the supporters of Mr. Scarrett or otherwise, relatives and friends at home and abroad. And we all do this every week with no anger, no malice, no personal attacks, no vilification, no divisiveness, just simply looking to bring back civility, a caring society, good governance, peace and love among our Kalinago and Afro-Caribbean brothers and sisters and friends of Dominica at home and abroad. So we ask that wherever you are in Dominica, any community in Dominica, in the region, and globally, join this conversation on the Global View on Q and call in and have your say as you do every Tuesday with me, Mr. G, only on Q95, the big station. This series, of course, has shown us that elections have consequences. We looked through all of these eras of all these various leaders, and we can see we have a democracy and there are elections every time, and leaders are elected. The series has shown us that elections have consequences. It has also shown us that performance and results matter. They make a huge difference in people's lives. Hence, a question that you hear it asked all the time: are you better off now than you were in 2000, or in 2001, or in 2004? Or are you really better off right now in 2022? But as usual, before we get into all of this tonight on the leadership and the legacy and the performance of these leaders, I'm sure that my distinguished guests will want to first make a couple of comments, if they can, if they will, on some of the burning current issues now facing Dominica. Developments in the troubling diplomatic relations with the Syria debacle, and now with Morocco. The embattled alien CBI program in Dominica and the Caribbean. We still see the CBI coming under very, very close scrutiny in Europe and the UK and the US and Canada and so on. Then the shadowy DLP government purchase of controlling shares in DOM. Like I say shadowy because we really have not got much information at all about what's happening there. So who actually paid for this shares in Dominic? How much was actually paid? What deal, if any, was made as regards repayment or forgiveness of outstanding government electricity or other debts to Dominic? We know that very likely government would owe Dominic because, I mean, it's a fact of the matter, government has to consume. The question is, what is likely to happen to those debts? How does this purchase of controlling interest in Dominic fit into a national plan for resilience and sustainability in terms of transitioning into renewable energy? What happened to Emera's original interest in generating renewable energy in Dominica? And now, given Dominica's Petro-Caribbean deal with Venezuela for fossil fuel and the $100 million debt forgiveness, or is it 100 million? Is it possibly more than that? We don't know for sure. From Venezuela, which was supposed to translate into cheaper electricity for Dominican households, but did not. Are the conditions to be fulfilled by government pursuant to this share purchase agreement? Dominicans still await the DLP government's explanations and clarifications on all of these issues and questions for purposes of clarity, for transparency, and for accountability. And what are the real prospects for the long outstanding but elusive geothermal project? I'm sure that if the Prime Minister was here with us tonight, I'm sure he would have been able to answer all of those questions for us, but he's not here tonight. Is anybody front-loading the payment of these Dominic shares, as is the case with the proposal to build the international airport, and with the construction of the housing units, and with building the Marigot Hospital, and the health clinics, and the proposed public library? So you can see why we ask, because this has been a pattern of financing of projects. We hope our government will soon answer these questions, as promised by Prime Minister Skerritt a few days ago. I mean, we had hoped that he would be here with us tonight to answer those questions for us. And Dominicans are still awaiting the DLP government's explanation about the purpose of Mr. Skerritt's recent visit to Turkey and Morocco, about establishing an OECS embassy in Morocco, about establishing bilateral relations with Morocco, and also about the critical electoral and campaign finance reforms. I mean, very, very critical electoral campaign finance reform promised right after the 2019 general election. We're still not hearing too much about that. We hope that something is happening. So we're live on Q95 and on YouTube and on Facebook at Q95 FM Radio and YSQ FM. Please share the live. We salute you in all of the online streaming platforms. Invite your friends to join us, join the family on Q and get the latest breaking stories and happenings. And tonight, we're going to assure that the voices of Dominican listeners, your voices at home and abroad, will be given priority on what you see as a solution to fix the issues and challenges and concerns facing you and Dominica, and make your own comparisons of the performance, the leadership, the legacy of Prime Minister Roosevelt Skerritt and his current DLB administration with that of our immediate past three Prime Ministers, James, Douglas, and Charles, and their administrations. And I'm sure at Lambi will take your calls. So here's another question. Is Dominica's CBI program and its economy on life support with no major productivity or productive economic pillars? And poverty and mendicancy are on the rise. Dominica's CBI program is under scrutiny by world superpowers. CBI revenues still account for about 55% of Dominica's budget. But these revenues are likely on the decline. And then, of course, over 4 something billion dollars of CBI revenues are said to be still unaccounted for. So there are issues, and in the meantime now, the cost of living is still rising. Gas prices are skyrocketing. Dominicans are not receiving any stimulus packages. We have not yet, and I'm sure that we have not yet felt the full impact of the international repercussions on the Dominica-Syria diplomatic relations fiasco. And meantime, many people are saying that Dominicans are facing a crisis of governance. Is that the case? So I continue to suggest that the best way to start fixing any such crisis of government in the current circumstances and environment is to unify Dominicans at home and abroad around the government of national unity, using the talent and the skills of every Dominican everywhere at home and abroad, so that we can all focus on working together to allow all ideas to contend and to act with one voice, with one mission to establish a robust economy where the private sector, not the government, will once again be the true engine of development, with a focus on export led investments, productivity and growth, meaningful employment, and wealth generation for all Dominicans. With agriculture, agribusiness, including medicinal cannabis, oils, extracts, renewable energy, manufacturing, art and culture industries, fisheries, and so on, water-based industries among those as major economic pillars. So there's so many that we could really rely on. And so we hope Dominicans will not be punished with visa restrictions by the EU or by the US or the Schengen countries due to our relations with Syria and Russia and the unprovoked Russian invasion of Ukraine that is ratcheting up our cost of living in Dominica. And of course, I'm saying again that we must do something urgently about these major issues of electoral and campaign finance reform to ensure all elections are free and fair in the future and to fortify our institutions that are the pillars of any modern democracy, like our IPO Commission and our Electoral Commission. As I said, elections have consequences and results matter. And so I just wanted to repeat tonight that in my opinion, we really do not have a chance of changing direction and fixing our economy or the woes that we have in any meaningful way in the short or medium term within the current environment of victimization, of divisiveness and hostility, and intolerance of alternative views and ideas, and especially without the inputs and expertise of all of our Dominicans at home and abroad, educated and uneducated, some of whom are still being victimized and marginalized. I believe our best hope going forward, as I said, is to unify the country around a government of national unity. Now, I've been doing for some weeks now. I call on the current DLP government to seriously drop all of the frivolous charges that have been brought against members of the opposition and people like Dr. Thomson, Fontaine, and other patriots, and allow them to use their full potentialities to help restore Dominica's economy and establish social stability. Certainly, Dr. Fontaine is doing it in South Sudan. He can do it at home. We are witnessing the evolution also of contemporary people's organizations like Nature Island, Dominica Civil Liberties Foundation, NITCLIF, to continue to fight for freedom and health and well-being of every Dominican. Former UN Ambassador Crispin Gregoire and retired ASP Mr. Nicholas George will be with Matt on Talk on the Block tomorrow, Wednesday, from 1 to 1:30 to bring you some more information about NITCLIF. So meantime, I ask you just simply go to the NITCLIF website at www.nidclf.org and make a donation to assist the search for the unaccounted billions and to help the people of Salisbury get some redress for the tear gas and gunshots leveled at them by armed forces while they slept. You'll recall just before the election, the eve of the election in 2019. So again, huge shout outs, much love and appreciation, and a big thank you to our healthcare providers and frontline workers. I'm sure doing their best to keep us safe. Please follow the advice, and stay alive. Happy to have you with us tonight. Welcome you warmly and embrace you wherever you are in every community in Dominica, in the region and globally. Thanks to Sherwin Norris, keeping us on the air, and to Lambie Charles for being on the console directing the traffic. He will take your calls tonight because your voice is priority for us tonight. So having said this, I just wanted to make sure I went through all of the talking points that I did use in the discussion with Mr. James and Mr. Seraphin. I thought we'd use the same ones tonight to be fair when we're dealing with Prime Ministers Douglas and Charles and Skerritt here tonight. So we just want to make sure we're fair to all. So I want to just go over now to Dr. Irving Andre to get the conversation started. Dr. Andre, I believe if you would open your mic, and I'm pretty sure that you might have some comments to make before we go into the meat of the discussions here tonight.
Let me say good evening to you, good evening to Lambie, good evening to Sherwin, good evening to Dr. Thomson Fontaine, Good evening to your listeners. I hope everyone had a great Easter. I hope everyone had an occasion to reflect on the good word. I hope everyone had occasion to think of what it is to be not just a Christian, but a good citizen, really. And particularly at this time when there are so many threats to the very basic tenets of our democratic existence. I think it's important that we reflect upon that. In fact, indeed, I would dare say that we have a duty to reflect on these principles and these precepts. And let me commend Mr. G for starting this session with this meditative hymn from Peter Tosh. And I take it as almost a homage you were paying to those who have the audacity to walk, to exercise their democratic right at a time when so many people in so many different countries are doing so. Here it is that a group of Dominicans are doing so peacefully, without trespassing on anyone's property, without transgressing on anyone's rights, without damaging anyone's property, without impeding any traffic. And yet, ominously, they're being told, a selected few, have been advised that they will receive a summons. I think the only summons they should receive, right, quite frankly, is a summons from the Almighty saying that I'm proud of you, my son or my daughter. You are doing what you should be doing as a devout believer of the good word. But I didn't come here to talk about this. We came to talk about matters that are of great interest to us as a nation, our leadership in the past, what we can learn from that leadership, and hopefully that knowledge will bring about an opening in the tunnel of darkness, which unfortunately seems to be our fate at this point. We've talked about the whole business, the solid business of the Syrian connection, and I think the world will have occasion to reflect on it even more, because the crisis in Ukraine, the butchering of innocent civilians, pregnant women, elderly people, persons with deformities, persons who've done no wrong, is coming into greater scrutiny, because it appears that this conflict is entering a dangerous and perhaps a last phase. Fortunately, the Ukrainians are receiving a tremendous amount of arms from Western countries. But arrayed against the Ukrainian patriots are thousands of foreign troops, tens of thousands from Syria, our friends, those for whom, after the initial declaration that Dominic had entered into this agreement, on official websites of those who had an interest in this relationship in terms of passports, there was euphoria. There were cries of joy. Dominica has made this great breakthrough by getting into this agreement. And then the backlash started. And then the lady from Castle Bruce was thrown under a rock from which she has not emerged. And as many commentators have said, it is impossible, it is inconceivable that Ms. Bannis would have signed such an agreement on her own. It could not be the devil. She could not have been the agent of the devil to have done that. She was the agent of her superiors ensconced in Dominica, who have an interest to forge a relationship with every country in crisis, whose oligarchs are seeking some type of safe haven, some type of refuge in terms of European destinations where they can hide their ill-gotten gains. So as we speak today, a few weeks ago, it was disclosed that this vendor, this hawker, outside a Pakistani supermarket, was shouting, "Cocoa for sale, cocoa for sale, cocoa for sale." And in London, you had this Nigerian with a glass of champagne in one hand and a Dominica diplomatic passport, echoing and singing, how I'm all right, or I'm all right, or I'm all right. Probably borrowing a line or two from Sour. And that is where we are now, between these polarities, being known as perhaps the chief architect for making it possible for persons, so many peoples, not all of them, but too many persons, fleeing justice in some countries. And Dominica is giving them the handout. It's a mockery. It's a mockery of that biblical imagery of the Father extending his hand of life to those who need it. It incurs that metaphor of Pierre Charles as painted by, God forbid, the senior counsel himself, saying how Pierre Charles, burdened by health issues, craving the assistance and the support and the welcoming shoulders of his comrades, they bit that hand. Guess where some of these folks end up, for God's sakes. Those who were lamenting what happened to Pierre Charles in bed, in a gross and unseemly bed, with the same types of things that Rosie had indicated, and we'll come to Rosie in good time, that he will not, at least under his rule, Dominica will not have to deal with those issues. So this is the sorry state of affairs that we're in right now. The interests of the state, the interests of the populace have been sacrificed on the altar of self-interest. And this is where we are now. And the question is, what will it take for us to emerge from that sorry state of affairs? These are my opening remarks.
Yes, and thank you, Dr. Andre. The same thing, Dr. Thomson Fontaine. I mean, your comments before we really delve into the legacies and the leadership and the performance of our leaders and the comparison. Before we do that, your comments on some of these issues that you see are really facing Dominica at this time.
Well, a very good evening, Mr. G, and of course, Dr. Andre. Thanks for this thrilling opening remarks. I am almost, giddy with just listening to you and seeing the way you phrase the issues, and of course, Mr. G, for taking us down this road of where we are and the many, if you like, burning issues that are confronting us. A small nation, remind Dominicans of some 70,000 people, but we have more data than many countries put together. Very few countries in the Caribbean have the kind of issues that we have to deal with. Lambi, very good evening to you and Sherwin, and of course to all of the countless listeners I've just been interacting with some online on your Facebook page, and just to shout out in particular those who are listening via Facebook. I wanted to begin my very quick focus on two issues really, the Domlek issue and that of the signing of diplomatic relationship with Western Sahara. With regards to Domlek, I understand since our program last week, Tuesday, in which we called for the Prime Minister to come clean with the Dominican public in terms of how much was paid for Domlek. I am told that he subsequently made a statement indicating that he will do so. And it still begs the question that almost 2 weeks after the announcement of the sale, we still have nothing official from our government. And that continues to bother me, obviously, as a Dominican, worried about the fact that our government can take actions on the behalf of the people of Dominica and not from the people of Dominica on whose behalf those actions are taken. And it speaks to a governance style that is sorely lacking, that is contemptuous of the Dominican public, that shows very scant regard for the people that you're supposed to be representing. And it's very unfortunate that the Prime Minister is not there and did not honor your invitation, Mr. G. What is he afraid of? It would have been nice for us to have had a conversation with Prime Minister Roosevelt Scary tonight, the very same way in which we had the conversation last week with Prime Minister Edison James, in which he was able to defend his actions. He was able to speak through his successes, address, whatever weaknesses there were in his administration. He did that boldly and fearlessly. And the question becomes, why is it that our Prime Minister is not willing to do the same? Is it that he is frightened about what Dr. Andrew spoke about? Men of questionable repute holding Dominica's diplomatic passports, and our passports being sold like cheap bakes, all over the Middle East. It's it's really um, troubling to me that the Prime Minister will not complain on Dominic. What exactly is going on? But as we indicated last week, and I just want to reiterate, I've been keeping a very close eye on the if you like, the different statements that have been issued by EMERA to the Securities and Exchange Commission. And it's just a matter of time before they will have to say how much we'll have to talk to the stockholders, because unlike the government of Dominica, they have a responsibility to the stockholders to report accurately and report this type of information. And when you think that a company feels they're more compelled to do something like this than a prime minister of a country who is using the resources of the people of Dominica, whose resources he was using, whether it's the sale of Dominican passports or whether it's the taxes that have been collected, the very high taxes, Macchio, that have been imposed upon the people of Dominica, that ultimately it is the people of Dominica's resources, and yet nothing is being done. So we hope that this information will come out, and when it does, we'll have an interesting conversation about it, because I seem to believe that something may have happened in this exchange, because normally there'd be nothing to hide, especially from stock that's on the market. But as I indicated, it is very likely that the stock was bought for a price higher than the market price of $3, because we know that soon after the purchase, the recorded price on the regional stock market jumped to $3.50, which only indicates that a great demand above and beyond what the market was offering, which would be reflected in a higher price being offered. So it's quite possible that we paid more. And the question, if that's what happened, why? Why would the government of Dominica pay more for a stock that has been offered publicly at one price, and you pay more for it? I am left in the absence, and I'll say that, in the absence of any information from the Prime Minister, we can only assume that they paid more than they were supposed to pay, and that's the reason why they've been quiet. Because if you paid less than the market price, there'd be something to shout about. If you paid the market price, there'd be nothing to shout about. So in either case, you would have said something. The fact that you choose not to say anything about it tells me that there may have been some, as we say in our local parlance, some kokomaka may have happened around the sale of the Dominic shares. So that's one issue. The other issue, very quickly, the signing of relations with the Western Sahara. As we said, there have been some informal inquiries made of regional countries, and we've heard from a couple of those countries. And as far as we can tell, Mr. G, none of the regional countries were aware of the opening of this consulate on their behalf in Morocco. We're hearing unofficially from these countries. There is certainly a move on now to have the countries speak formally on this. And so we are waiting to hear officially what those countries have to say. But it seems to me that it's some of the same dilly dallying, some of the dark places that we find ourselves as a country dealing with, whether it's dealing with Syria, or whether it's dealing with a repressive regime as Morocco that has tried to impose its will on the people of Western Sahara since 1975, and something that the world has largely rejected. And for some reason, Dominica, a former slave colony, a country that knows the daunting damage that can be done from slavery and from ownership by a foreign country, that we would be on the side of the oppressors. And so it really begs a very serious question, and all the more reason why our conversation tonight about the legacy of this prime minister is important. And we need to talk about his legacy. Probably he's on his way out. It's hard for me to imagine any road for the prime minister remaining in office beyond his tenure at the end of this 5 year period. It's hard to imagine any Dominican in the sane mind willing to give another 5 years for a government that has been in office for over 20 years. And you can look, notwithstanding the best efforts by the way, Mr. G of Kenny and Sam, on the other side program to paint a picture of roses and dandelions and sunlight and all of those great things happening to the Dominican economy. The people who live in Dominica know it. Those of us who live outside of Dominica and follow Dominica closely knows that this is not the case. That the economy of Dominica is in complete shambles, and that unless and until something is done, is in particular the removal of this government by the ballot box, unless this is done, then we'll continue to suffer in Dominica. So yeah, so when we come back, we'll be discussing those legacies, and that's the conversation I'm really prepared for and looking forward to having
Yes, and thanks a lot, Fontaine. Maybe if you could turn off your mic, so I'm getting a little feedback coming back into me here. Essentially, I'm glad we touched on some of those issues there because those issues are not going away for us, and you can see all of those issues we're talking about ultimately are going to have some impact on our economy. Ultimately, they're going to have some impact on the living standards and the quality of life of every Dominican at home and abroad. Because when the lives of Dominicans are impacted negatively at home, it means that Dominicans abroad have to send more barrels down, right, and send more money to assist. So clearly, it seems to me that these issues need to be dealt with to try to preserve our economy because this economy has not been strong for quite a while. I think it's really a lot, it's a lot weaker now if we're on the verge of losing the CBI revenue. And that is something that must be taken very, very seriously. We did hear the Prime Minister tell us, if not CBI, then what? Obviously, not much attention was being given to agriculture, not much attention to fisheries and manufacturing and agribusiness and so on. So it's obvious that we have to be very concerned if we notice that the CBI revenues are going to be impacted negatively in a very short space of time. That will create some problem. But tonight we're here to discuss the leadership, the performance, and the legacy of our leaders. And we really have the last 4 prime ministers. I mean, we can start from, look at the comparisons between Edison James's era and his administration, also that of Rosie Douglas, and also that of Pierre Charles, and then our prime minister's career. But we know that Rosie Douglas was only there for a short space of time. But I do know that Dr. Andre will have a lot to say about that because he's very familiar with the eras of Rosie Douglas and with the eras of Pierre Charles as well. And we did hear from Edison James himself, and we had a conversation. So we have our listeners are very much more familiar now than some of them may have been before with what was the leadership style and the performance and the legacy of Edison James and his UWP administration. So, Dr. Andre, I want to go over to you to help us out. Let's get the conversation started.
Thank you again, Mr. G. And obviously, it's a very broad topic. What I'm going to do is to try to summarize, at the risk of distortion, the administration of each of these administrations could be described subject to further elaboration. With respect to Edison James's administration, I think one can say, after listening to the achievements of that administration, that it could be described as the gift that kept on giving. With respect to Rosie, his tenure was very limited. I think we can indicate, and subject to elaboration, that his administration could be categorized as the promise that may have given many things. With respect to the Pierre Charles's administration, in a sense short, but it was almost 4 years. In fact, October of 2000, if I recall correctly, a little short of 4 years. January of 2004, if my memory serves me right. One can say it's the man who scrupulously tried to give his citizens. But he was bedeviled by a number of factors beyond his control, the two most important of which being the economic difficulties confronted by Dominica at that time, evidenced by the strictures of the International Monetary Fund. And obviously, Dr. Fontaine knows much about that than I do. And with respect to the Skerrit administration, one can say that it represents the abortion of the gifts that his Labour Party predecessors promised. I think this is the general categorization of all three administrations. I will not repeat the developments and the advances made by the James administration. Obviously, as we've indicated, that certainly they had some issues which they had to contend with. The question of the re-engineered citizenry program, that certainly created issues. Obviously, the question of the Mining Act to this company, BP something, can't remember the full name, which certainly created many issues for the UWP. And also, they had to contend with the retribution of Mary Eugenia Charles, as we indicated on the last occasion. But for the UWP, the Dame Eugenia Charles would have won many more seats in 1990. You may recall that prior to the 1995 elections, there was this quote-unquote scandal that threatened the UWP ship. The bugging scandal. I think it emerged in late 1994, a few months before the 1995 elections. There was an inquiry. The commissioner found that Gonzalez, who had reported that he had been approached to bug the officers of the UWP, the commissioner found that he was not a credible witness. So potentially that represented an opportunity by those arrayed against the UWP to certainly undermine and certainly to destroy, politically speaking, the UWP at the 1995 elections. That did not materialize. And obviously one of the main developments in 2000, which accounted for the DLP success, was Dame Eugenia Charles's support given to Rosie Douglas and the DLP, reflecting a belief that anybody but the UWP should be in a position of power. So that, in essence, scuttled the ship in 2000, and in come Rosie. It is fair to say that Rosie was not an organization man, and probably the most conspicuous component of his brief tenure was the fact that although he had a significant number of connections out there, but in terms of building up an organization, in terms of empowering his team to forge ahead with progressive developments, that funded, not entirely as a result of his own shortcomings, but because, to a significant degree, because of his limited tenure and his efforts to forge a closer relationship with the French. There's no doubt in my mind that had he lived, he would have succeeded in that regard, because it was uppermost in his philosophy that Dominica, situated between two French islands, had a unique opportunity to cement a more formal relationship with the French, and specifically the European Union. And there's absolutely no doubt in my mind that but for his untimely death, he would have succeeded in that regard. But life is what it is. We do not determine how long our tenure will be. on this God good earth. And he moved on, and then the advent of Pierre Charles. Pierre Charles was bedeviled by two major issues: the economic crisis, which hopefully Dr. Thomson can give us a little more information about, and obviously the knives from within. And we all know that these knives were sharpened or being sharpened during his administration. We know of the famous, or should I say, the infamous meeting a few weeks in St. Joseph before his untimely death, that he was confronted by the hands of treachery, not the hands of peace or good government, but by the hands of treachery. We will not fight another election under you. You did not go to university. You are not worthy to be at the helm of the party. No, mark you, this is a Labour Party, for God's sakes. Mark you, this is Edward Oliver Libla's party. But look at the cruel irony that one of the indictments, or one of the points made against Pierre Charles, was his relative lack of education. No emphasis on his essential humanity. No recognition of his intrinsic integrity. No mention of his humanity. No mention of his scrupulous anxiety to assist his own folk, to usher in developmental programs that will inure to the benefit of all. It was reduced to a struggle for power. And I listened to Bernard Wiltshire this afternoon, eloquent as usual, brilliant rendition. And the ignominy of a junior minister under his watch having a meeting with the Chinese, for God's sakes. You think a junior Chinese minister could go and have a meeting with some American head of government, and he would be alive to tell the tale? You think a Russian could have done this? Of course not. But it was forged in treachery, and we are paying the price for that. Those double deals that we are now experiencing is the fruit of the loom. It is a legacy of that abortion that we had to go through as a population. The Constitution speaks about the gold standard of government. It speaks about peace, order, and good government. What we are witnessing is good government being held captive, being handcuffed, and kept in very compromising circumstances. Think of it. Think of the evidence. What happened to the IPO? What happened to the Public Works Department? What is happening to the opposition? What is happening to the criminal law, which is being weaponized to eviscerate the opposition? What is happening to the Electoral Commission? What about open tender for contracts to give Dominicans an opportunity to participate in the economy, to obtain funds to sustain their families, send their children to school, to buy homes, to plant their gardens, to give the folks an opportunity, the government hopefully, to build feeder roads, to increase production in the community? All that is gone. All that has been wiped off from the earth. And you have apostles saying how the economy is growing. And I'm no economist, I'm no expert, but I'm not blind. There are certain sectors are growing. There's no question about that. But is it growing where it matters? When we speak about good government, we speak about government that inures to the benefit of the population. We speak about government that extends a Christian hand to those in need. A government that is motivated, animated, and dedicated to the Christian maxim, whatever you do to my brother, that you do unto me. And in a sense, our past administrations They have tried as best as they can to maintain fidelity to that maxim. You are your brother's keeper. You have been given a unique opportunity to serve, to advance the cause of your population, to uplift the nation, to make opportunities that will ensure that this generation will have better prospects of advancement and development than the previous one. And I'm not going to dictate to anyone what is their prognosis or their assessment of where we are today. I leave it to them to arrive at their own conclusion. But there are storms on the horizon, and hopefully the storm that is coming is perhaps the storm that caused the rivers in the time of Hercules to wash down the 40 or 20 what years of detritus that have clogged the arteries of governance and good and democracy in Dominica, because that is what is needed. Thank you very much.
Lambi, I want to go over to Lambi before I go over to you, Dr. Fontaine, and take a quick break and run want a little drop here, take a little break, and then you can give out the numbers, and you can allow people to take 1 or 2 calls if you'd like, and then when you on the other side, I'll go to Dr. Thomson Fontaine. Over to you, Lambi.
The Global View in Q, the numbers are 449-3095, 449-3096, 449-3097, 616-4257, 305-432-9624, and we do this.
Something whispers in my ear and says you're not alone.
Nature Island Dominica Civil Liberties Foundation, Inc., Nidcliff, Kalinago and Afro-Caribbean Nature Islanders and friends of Dominica at home and abroad, coming together to help preserve the integrity of Dominica's democracy, human rights, and civil liberties, ensuring free, fair, and competitive elections on a level playing field within a system that guarantees freedom of expression, belief and association, respect for the inalienable rights of individuals and minorities, respect for the rule of law, for free communications media, and free from psychological, mental, and physical abuse of women, minors, the elderly, and young men. State lands are secretly being sold to political acolytes and shady foreigners. CBI hotels are sprouting up all over Dominica. Persons are becoming rich overnight. Public projects are awarded to foreigners and cronies without public tender, and the public is forced to pay in excess of $65,000 a month to rent and maintain a palace for a prime minister. In spite of this obscene display of wealth, seemingly generated by illegal means, Dominicans still live under tarpaulins and are deprived of a basic stimulus package in a debilitating pandemic. Monies donated by the World Health Organization to alleviate suffering seem to be diverted and squandered. Political allegiance is now a requirement for public assistance, while those who exercise their freedom of speech are victimized and ostracized. Nidcliff, support our radiothon, fundraising events, subscriptions, GoFundMe, and other initiatives to help raise funds to support a legal challenge against the siphoning of public funds from the Consolidated Fund and other initiatives and actions. Nature Island Dominica Civil Liberties Foundation, Inc., Nidcliff, working to help unify and build Dominica and our Afro-Caribbean and Kalinago brothers and sisters at home and abroad. Nidcliff, fighting to save our Nature Island Dominica.
You're always in my heart, but you are not alone. Oh, whisper the words and I'll come running. And girl, you know that I'll be there. I'll be there.
The Global View is taking your calls right now. The numbers again are 449-3095, 9697, 616-4257, 305-432-9624. And the lines are open for your calls right now.
Lambi, if you're going to wait for a few calls, and I'll just go over to Thomson Fontaine. As the calls come in, you'll interrupt us. And so let me go over to Dr. Thomson Fontaine. Thomson, your further thoughts after Dr. Andre?
Indeed, if I could add to some of what Dr. Andrew said, and just to look back at the legacies of Prime Minister Roosevelt Douglas and Prime Minister Pierre Charles. Both, unfortunately, both prime ministers had very little time in office. Pierre Charles more than Roosevelt Douglas. But one of the things that struck me about Prime Minister Roosevelt Douglas's stint in office was his seeming openness. Dr. Andre talked about his lack of organization and not building organization. So a lot of what he had, a lot of his contacts, a lot of the work that he had done over many, many years were lost to Dominica because he acted basically as a one man show. But you may recall that during his tenure, he had a very open policy in terms of letting Dominicans know what he was about. He would never travel without informing Dominicans. Dominicans would know where he was headed, what he was doing overseas on their behalf. In fact, he would travel with journalists, Carlisle, John Baptiste, and Matt Peltier, very often would accompany him on those foreign trips. So there was a certain openness about the Prime Minister Roosevelt Douglas, which I think is needed today. Because if you're going to be out there acting on behalf of the people of Dominica, it's only fair that you let the people know what you're acting and what you're doing on their behalf. And so it is or to me, one of the highlights of Prime Minister Douglas's legacy. Unfortunately, it was cut short by the hand of time, and in a way, we never got a chance to know what he could have done for Dominica. But I can tell you, I firmly believe that a Roosevelt Douglas leadership would not see the kind of cocoa macacree I spoke about earlier with regards to our passport sales and with regards to this complete contempt for the Dominican public. I think he was a much more humble individual, someone who was a lot more concerned about the well-being of the average Dominican, and he acted like this. I do not believe Prime Minister Roosevelt Douglas would live in a 64,000 a month mansion, whilst the majority of Dominicans were catching hell. I just don't see that in him.
Can I just interrupt you 1 second? Let's take a little call. Go right ahead, Lambi.
Yeah, good evening, caller. Thanks for joining us. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, good evening, gentlemen.
Good evening.
We are now reaping the mistake we have made of leaving a man there for almost 20 years. It has been proven that you cannot leave a black leader more than 10 years. And now we have left this man here for almost 20 years. And now we are reaping the results of our mistake. Now, Mr. G, I always hear you calling for let us unite and come together. I do not see that happening. I told you that already. As a matter of fact, instead of us uniting, Mr. G, it has gotten worse. You have a prime minister telling his supporters that if the opposition come, that you must get some hot water and tell them to move quickly before I throw some hot water on you. The leader of the country. So the Dominica is very, very divided. You have this man selling passports. Nobody knows who has our passports. Nobody knows how much money is being made. You have hotels being built, and we don't know how much money is being used. Mr. G, I know you're trying to, and I want to congratulate you for inviting the Prime Minister to the program. I knew he wouldn't come. We have a serious problem on our hands, and it seems to me, Mr. G, that what is like, if not Skerrit, then who else can lead Dominica? It's like these guys are going to destroy the country, and then if you put any other government there, in 6 months, the people are going to say, well, listen, better we leave Skerrit there, because they're not going to be able to run the country, because the country is going to be in so much chaos and debt that it wouldn't make sense to put another government there. So anyway, nice discussion. Good evening, gentlemen.
Good evening. Just to let you know that it was duty bound. Must invite the Prime Minister because we did invite Mr. Edison James and he turned up. We did invite Oliver Serafin and he turned up. We had to invite the Prime Minister to be here. But let's take another call, Landy.
Good evening, caller. Thanks for joining us. Go ahead, please.
Good evening, Mr. Ambi.
Good evening.
Good evening, Mr. Gregoire.
Good evening.
Good evening, Dr. Andre and Dr. Fontaine. I would like to know why is it that every time Sheridan gets himself in hot water, he has the ability to get out of it. For instance, this man and his followers or his appointees got themselves in hot water and committed an atrocity against Dominica. I mean, not one, but I'm talking in this one especially. This problem with Syria and what is happening to Ukraine and Russia right now is fully embedded in it. Why is it that this hot topic or atrocity, people are not on the street actually demonstrating against this man and his followers, like Dr. Daru, Barnes, and Kelvin Daru? To me, this thing is totally wrong. Is there any law against Sheridan? Because he is at the helm of government, can't he be persecuted? Because those things that he's doing, he's a compulsive liar. He jumped from one area to the other. And this is a big problem for us in Dominica. That's why Dominicans are suffering so much. And the people in the diaspora are actually the people that are maintaining the economy of Dominica. This man, with all of these $4.2 billion, plus all the money that is being wasted, Dominicans are suffering. And it is really very sad to see that this man and his people are living in the lap of luxury, whereas Dominicans who are so independent and now are so dependent on him for pittance. This is so wrong. And what about, he said he would leave this so-called mansion that is his and say it's not his in 2 years' time. He's still there. So there are many things, so many things we can talk about. But this man needs to get out. They need to be fired from this position and let the people that can run Dominica effectively run Dominica, because he's bringing Dominica way down, lower and lower into economic problems. And it is a very sad situation. Have a pleasant night. God's blessing always.
Yeah, and thank you very much for that. I hope you had a great Easter weekend. Let's take another call, Lambi.
Good evening, caller. Thanks for being there. Go ahead, please.
Yes, Lambi, good evening. Good evening to Mr. G, Justice Andre, good evening, and Dr. Thomson Fontaine, good evening.
Yeah, good evening.
Here I'm making a comparison with the different administrations.
Yes.
Well, I'm not going to compare any or the other administration with Sheridan's administration. People have something saying about chalk and cheese. I really don't understand that phrase, why they say chalk and cheese, because you can eat cheese, but I don't know why they compare it with chalk. I would say it is what I would use is like diamonds and copper. You know, so I'm not going to make a comparison. But why I really called is the caller previous to the last caller. He said it doesn't make sense putting another administration in charge, and no matter what administration you put, they're going to have problems. I want to tell him, sir, and any other Dominican who's thinking like that, this is a defeatist attitude. any other administration would do better than Roosevelt's Skerrit administration. Well, if the United Workers' Party or when the United Workers' Party get into office, well, we always see it is like icing on the cake. But any other administration will do better than Roosevelt's Skerrit administration. So don't say that. We have money out there. It was Dominica's own ambassador of Oceans and Sea that say he's afraid that his money will disappear into the offshore banks and so on. We have money, billions out there. So when another administration come into office, all that money is going to come back to our treasury. So we will have enough money to develop the country. So please, I do not want to hear anybody saying that again. Please.
Right. Thanks a lot for that. Lambi, maybe we can move on to Dr. Thomson Fontaine, and you can maybe interrupt us a little bit later as your calls come in, Lambi. Let me go over to Dr. Fontaine again to continue.
Yes, indeed. I absolutely love the callers' contribution tonight as they continue to add value to our own conversation that we're having. And I wanted to talk about a little bit about the legacy as well of Prime Minister Pierre Charles. In fact, he was one of those prime ministers that I had the most conversations with. You would recall that in... Are we going to go?
Yeah,
sure, yes, by all means.
You want to take a call?
Yeah, yes. On the overseas line, please go ahead with your call.
Yes, Lambi, greetings to you and to Mr. G and Justice Andre. Dr. Fontaine, good evening to you, my brother.
Yes, good evening.
Mr. G, what really hurts me about Skerrit's style of governance is the way he is destroying our democratic system, the foundation of our society, the way we live. Roosevelt Skerrit has his hands in the electoral reform. He has his hands in the police commissioner dictating to our office in terms of law and order. He has his hands in the IP. I mean, he's like an octopus, and that is what I mean. Different administration will have different style of governance in terms of the ideology or the vision might be different. We mightn't like the ideology or the vision. But for example, Eugenia Charles, we could never question her ability in terms of transparency and honesty, integrity. Edison James is the same thing. Patrick, none of this other government, we might disagree with them, with the party politics, maybe the way the style of government. But Roosevelt Skerrit is just a different animal. Roosevelt Skerrit has no style. He has no respect for law and order. Prosecuting innocent civilian. Mr. G, imagine, you have to get a permission to walk in Roseau. People haven't got the ability to choose the representative who are going to represent them in terms of the parliamentary system of governance, of the parliamentary democratic system we have. He's contaminating everybody around him. That's why none of these other ministers, they cannot talk. Because when they have to tell you, if it's not Roosevelt Skerrit, then who? In a great organization like the Dominican Labour Party, he's the only one that has the ability to lead. And we know how we lead, by deceptive means, dishonesty. There are so many things different about Roosevelt Skerrit. This man couldn't survive no other country, no democratic system, nowhere on earth except in Dominica. So it's not about we hate Roosevelt Skerrit or anything like that, but he has no respect for law and order, no respect for human rights, no respect for our independence, no respect for our integrity, our economies. There's so many things. Roosevelt Skerrit is just a disgusting person. Politically, not personally, because I don't know him as an individual, personally as an individual. But the style of government is just really, really, really something Dominicans have never seen. And I hope it don't get worse than that. We just have to make our mind to get this man out one way or the other, any way, any means. We just have to get rid of with good ideas. And with Roosevelt scared, nothing like that is going to work. The only remedy for Dominica is to get rid of he and his entire cabinet because none of them is not better than him. Thank you, Mr. G.
And thanks a lot for your call. Appreciate that. Dr. Fontaine, Lambi, I don't think Lambi, you have another call, Lambi? If you have a call, let's take it before. Well, let's go over to Dr. Thomson Fontaine then. Dr. Fontaine, let me go over to you now.
Yes, indeed, Mr. G. I was making the point, and thanks again to the caller. I was making the point about the legacy of Pierre Charles, and one of the things that I was thinking about earlier, and in fact I made a note on the Facebook page is there any Caribbean leader that is worse than Roosevelt Skerrit at this point in time? I mean, in terms of where the other countries have been, in terms of where they're going, in terms of the kind of leadership that they have, I think we clearly come out last Kakarat. We are definitely last in the pot. And it's just because the Prime Minister Skerrit's leadership, and one of the good things though is that this leadership is coming to an end. I am one of those who believe that the best Dominica's best years are ahead. And I would like to encourage Dominicans not to despair, because as dark as it is, we are told that the darkest hour is usually the one right before dawn, right before we have a breakthrough and the sunlight floods the earth again. That's when it gets the darkest. And I think we're in our darkest hour in Dominica in terms of this, just the kind of leadership that, as I said, is so contemptuous of the Dominican public, that basically you snub your nose at the public, the kind of leadership that will really justify a 64,000 monthly rental in a country the size of Dominica. That is something as well that Prime Minister Pierre Charles would never do. I mean, I had occasion to speak to Prime Minister Pierre Charles on several occasions because you would recall, I believe it was in 2003, when there was this very interesting problem in Dominica with the economy not doing well, and Prime Minister Pierre Charles was forced to take a program with the IMF. We discussed several times over the IMF program, and he reached out to me as a Dominican. I did not really know Prime Minister Pierre Charles before, but knowing that I worked at the IMF at the time, he reached out to me to get my views and my advice on what could be done in Dominica. Because he was making use. He decided that he would make use of the resources, the human resource that was available to him from Dominica. And it is through that process that I got to know him and had several one-on-one interactions with him. I met him when he visited Washington on a couple of occasions as well. So you have a situation where we've moved sadly again in the hands of time, interfering with what was going on. But you had a leader who was really a grassroots, if you like, leader who cared deeply. I believe Pierre Charles cared very deeply about the average Dominican person. And even when he went through these austerity measures, it was with a view to improving the lot of Dominicans. It showed a genuine concern. And the question was, we have no resources. What can we do? How can we take some pain or take some medicine currently so that we can move forward better in the future? And so he was able to do, and I be one of his programs was to take a court as public servants to take some of the sacrifice, and take a court in salary, which was later restored. But it shows a leadership that was caring, a leadership that was concerned about what was happening to the Dominican public, and it's something that we've lost sadly. Because what we have in place today is a leadership that is going after innocent people. And I would like to take this opportunity as well to call on the police chief, the police commissioner, to, lower the political rhetoric, lower the temperature, de-escalate is what the term is. Um, don't push things, don't make things worse than they are. Let the people walk as they should be free to do. Labour Party had a walk in town a few months ago. Did they receive permission from you to walk? So the Labour Party can do as it pleases, and other people who want to simply express their rights are not able to do so. Why is the police stoking this temperature? Putting wood into the fire, visiting people at their homes. Like the common criminals. Why is that pattern? The pattern that we saw that first of all happened. And me and I want to reassure the Dominican public that the case against the police chief for wrongful arrest is going forward. There was a hearing last week, in fact, before the Judge Ernie Stevenson, and my lawyer requested additional time for witness statements. And there's an expectation that that case will be heard in July. So it's going forward. The police force for wrongful arrest. Because I was actually on the radio announcing, everybody was hearing my voice at Q95, the records are there. I got the radio station at about 4 o'clock that afternoon, and they actually started at about 7:30, and I was actually in
Um,
contact with Ally at the time, bringing me news. That was the first I learned about anything happening after a very peaceful demonstration we had earlier, very peaceful and successful gathering of thousands of Dominicans coming in the middle of Roseau at 12 o'clock that afternoon. So it is clear that that their actions were politically motivated, and that somebody should pay for that. Quite frankly, and I hope that the courts will see it for what it is. But I think it's important for the police commissioner to de-escalate the situation, and for Prime Minister Roosevelt Skerrit. After all, he's the one directing the show. He is the one on whose orders the police are acting. And I would say let the people be free to protest. Let the people be free to speak out. Because after all, Dominicans need to exhale because the country is in such a bad place. We're in such the always is so dark in Dominica. Many people have despaired. I know several Dominicans who so-called wash their hands on Dominica, said they have nothing to do with Dominica again because things are proving so difficult. But I believe that our better days are ahead, and that we will certainly see a better time when this government is removed. And I'm firmly convinced, Mr. G, I'm of the very firm conviction that this administration is on its last legs, it's on its last days. It will undo itself, it will unravel by virtue of the number of cases. We talk about death through 1,000 cuts. You're talking about, all of what has happened with corruption that we've spoken about. And people say you should not talk about corruption, but it is not working. But it's important that we do. It's important that we keep reminding Dominicans that corruption kills, that corruption has a very steep price to pay for the country, and that we need to move away from it. All of those diplomatic appointments from Corallo in Italy, a magnet, gambling magnet, wanted by Interpol, to Alison Madueke, who stole billions from Nigeria and who found solace in a Dominican passport, from former Nazi who killed Jews in Europe, to a gentleman who was in fact given uh, instructions online in the dark web on people how to kill and how to find murderers and people to do evil and selling drugs and all the rest of it, given solace of our Dominican passport. So we have this constant drumbeat, if you like, of wrong and malfeasance and really wrong practices that we've seen that I believe will be the undoing of this administration. And what remains is for the people of Dominica to open their eyes, and in particular those in Dominica who somehow believe that this is the best thing that we have. No, our best days are ahead of us. It is not the end. It is not with us right now. And we should do everything within our power to ensure that we move beyond. So in closing this particular contribution, I certainly applaud the work that Prime Minister's Charles and Douglas did. And it's unfortunate that they were not allowed to. But what we ended up with, the legacy that we have now, the result of all of this is this very sorry leadership that we have in Dominica that is contrary, that is dividing. And one of the callers said it right. How can a prime minister encourage his followers to take violent measures against the opposition? I mean, this is just unheard of. People should have the right to support whichever government that they choose without fear of being hurt or harmed by those who share a different view. And it's really unfortunate. But my I'm always optimistic, Mr. G, and I believe that better days ahead for Dominica, and that the end of this administration draweth nigh.
Yes, Dr. Andrea, I'm not sure if you want to add something else on top of this at this point, because I mean we haven't started even comparing. Somebody said don't compare apples and oranges. Compare what diamonds and copper. We still, as we go along a little bit, we may have to go back to Dr. Fontaine a little later on. Let's compare the economies that exist now versus what existed under some of the other regimes before, and the society and the culture and all of these other things. We can make those comparisons. But Dr. Andrew, let's take a comment from before we go over to Lambi.
Well, certainly, it seems to me that one thing which unites many of the previous administrations was the belief that to foster or to forge development in Dominica, one had to put a lot of resources into our agriculture sector, into agro-processing, into agriculture, obviously, not just in the banana industry, but in other industries. And I think that is true of virtually all the previous administrations. Certain of them succeeded more than others in terms of diversification, whether it's development of a prawn industry, agro-processing, trying to provide assistance to persons who sought to add value to our raw materials. I think virtually all of the previous administrations were engaged in varying degrees to those initiatives. And I think it is fair to say that, as Ralph Gonzalez has intimated of St. Vincent, that he knew and he warned some of his colleagues in the Eastern Caribbean that selling passports is just not sustainable. He knew something, and he's gloating now because he says, look, I told you so. Because once the Europeans and the Americans shut the tap off to protect themselves, to make sure that they are not taken advantage of, ill-gotten gains are not invested in their economies, obviously the collateral damage will be to those islands who peddle. But to a significant degree, we are still in denial. You have many sycophants saying, we don't sell passports. No, we don't do that. Every other country is referring to it as selling passports. But these self-righteous acolytes tell us with righteous indignation that no, that's not what we're selling citizenship. Yes, we're selling citizenship. And how many of these passport purchases come to Dominica to live and to invest? No. They require the passport to be able to travel visa-free to certain destinations. And these destinations do not include Morocco. These destinations do not include Turkey. These destinations do not include Syria. These destinations do not include Moscow. No, they have their sights are on higher places, higher cities, because they want to gravitate towards those places where the democratic way of life can afford them some protection. And that is the problem. That is what we face. And that is why we'll pay a price. If, in fact, the Europeans and the Americans, they go through. Because let's face it, they understand that charity begins at home. It is better to protect their economies and their people than to worry about some other islands who were giving persons of nefarious characters a gateway to their countries. And we will be caught in a vice grip of, frankly, retribution. Thank you.
Yes, and thanks a lot, Dr. Andrea. I'm going to go over to Lambi. Lambi, let's take a little commercial break now. And you can probably take a couple of calls if you have some calls coming in. And then we'll go back to Dr. Thomson Fontaine on the other side, because certainly we need to make the comparisons between the regimes. Although one of the callers said there's no comparison, but we still need to do that, because so many people today, I mean, especially young people between the age of up to 40, many of them still do not understand that what the economy could be like, the potential that it has. And that is why I wanted the caller say, if the government changes, nothing will happen. That is not so at all. So much could happen. If you have the right environment that is enabling, a lot can happen. And so I think it's important to be able to make those comparisons and bring back the ideas that can make a difference in a different environment, a different policy environment. So Lambi, let's go over to you, and you can take a little commercial break, and then you can take a couple of calls if you have them.
Something whispers in my ear and says you are not alone.
Nature Island Dominica Civil Liberties Foundation, Inc., Nidcliff, uniting our Kalinago and Afro-Caribbean nature islanders and friends of Dominica at home and abroad, coming together to help preserve the integrity of Dominica's democracy, human rights, and civil liberties, ensuring free, fair, and competitive elections on a level playing field within a system that guarantees freedom of expression, belief and association, respect for the inalienable rights of individuals and minorities, respect for the rule of law, for free communications media, and free from psychological, mental, and physical abuse of women, minors, the elderly, and young men. Some reported $4 billion from the sale of Dominica's Sacrament of Sovereignty, our citizenships, are alleged to have been deposited in mysterious foreign bank accounts controlled by two men, a shady Lebanese operative and a lead policy director. It is alleged that from this fund, the authorities have illegally and corruptly paved the way for thousands of Dominicans living abroad to travel to Dominica on the eve of general elections to vote strategically to help keep their government in power. Even worse, this money, which should have legally been deposited in the consolidated fund, has allegedly been used for every purpose imaginable for the sole goal of allowing government to remain in power. As a result of this illegal diversion of state funds, which is publicly acknowledged, Dominicans have been economically brought to their knees, while large buildings whose ownership is unknown are sprouting all over the country. Our architectural heritage is being desecrated. One party mysteriously erects an imposing headquarters in the city. Foreign artists are paid hundreds of thousands of dollars to hold partisan concerts in Dominica. Support our radiothon, fundraising events, subscriptions, GoFundMe, and other initiatives to help raise funds to support a legal challenge against the siphoning of public funds from the Consolidated Fund and other initiatives and actions. Nature Island Dominica Civil Liberties Foundation, Inc., Nidcliff, working to help unify and build Dominica and our Afro-Caribbean and Kalinago brothers and sisters at home and abroad. Nidcliff, fighting to save our nature island, Dominica.
You are not alone. I am here with you. Though you're far away, I am here to stay. You are not.
The global view is taking your calls right now. The numbers are 449-3095, 449-3096, 449-3097, 616-4257, 305-432-9624, and we waiting your calls.
Yes, Lambi, if you don't have a call now, I'm just going to go back to Dr. Thomson Fontaine, and you can interrupt us as you go along, as your calls come in. Right? But Dr. Fontaine, I mean, here's the thing. There are comparisons to be made because you have different regimes at different times and in different eras. We have seen what has happened. I mean, we saw what was the situation under Eugenia Charles in her day, under Edison James in his day. We certainly can compare that to what we see in the economy in today's, under this present administration. We know what's happening in agriculture. We've seen what happened in manufacturing over the different eras. We saw the surge in manufacturing. We saw what happened in manufacturing now. We saw agribusiness. Imagine way back when, a gentleman called Leo Emanuel, he had a thing called jam fruit. He canned orange juice many, many, many years ago. We have nothing like that today. We used to sell water. We're not selling water to anybody now. We're not bottling water. I mean, obviously there are comparisons to be made, and wouldn't we like to see those things come back? But it's obvious that if this regime is saying, if not passports, then what? I do not see any emphasis on the what. I see emphasis mainly on the passports. So maybe you can help us out some of those comparisons, Dr. Fontaine.
Yes, indeed. And Mr. J, I want to take this comparison back into history because as a very keen student of history myself,
And
and as an economist,
every time you
if
start saying something important, Lambi beckons. So Lambi, take
that's
it all.
yes.
Yes. On the overseas line, please go ahead with your call.
Yes, pleasant good evening, gentlemen. Very good show, very interesting. Calling from Atlanta, and I think it's a very good show. First of all, let me thank Mr. Gregoire for laying out a very broad areas in which people can consider. But also, I want to just make a few statements on the prime ministers that this lecture series is really examining tonight, including former Prime Minister Roosevelt Douglas and Pierre Charles. I recall being in Salisbury, and Roosy came on Block 44 by a very popular bar they call the Wavell Bar. Very popular. And he was very interactive with the people, and he made drinks for them. He laughed. And after, before he left, he said, guys, I understand you guys have a very strong hold of UWP, and you guys not going to vote for me. But I just wanted you to meet me. And those guys, they hugged him before he left, I mean, it speaks volume of his humility and the way he interacts with people. And by the way, there were no police around him, He was with all the guys on the block. That's my remembrance of Roosevelt Douglas. Pierre Charles, what I can say is I know the people of Grande were very proud of him. They supported him and they loved him. I have people from Salisbury who are his family, some of the Charles family. And to qualify someone based, according to Dr. Andre, relatively of his formal education, but to negate his experience and his ability to manage and so forth, I thought that was very unfortunate, right? And I guess the final statement I would make in this current administration, I thought tonight was a perfect opportunity for the current prime minister to come in and to speak about his legacy, about his performance. If I recall the last Global View and Q with former Prime Minister Edison James, as far as I recall, he had a litany, a whole array of progressive things that he thought that he did. And of course, it was open to the scrutiny of the public to challenge him on it. But I felt he did a very decent job when he came across to defend his very short term in office. And so with all the accusations, not just in Dominica, not just on Global View and Q, but across the world that is facing this current regime, I thought tonight was a perfect opportunity for the current administration to come in and say, hey, look, we have done several infrastructure projects. We have built some hotels. We are doing and really try to put down a portfolio of what they have done, and then to defend the accusations that came against them. So I think, quite frankly, that's a missed opportunity. But I believe the discussion is going on. It's good. It's healthy. And that's what democracy is all about, that all ideas should contend. I just wanted to share those thoughts and to wish you guys all the best. I think it's a good program. Thank you so much.
And thank you for some great thoughts there. Lambi, if you don't mind, I'll go back to Dr. Thomson Fontaine. So I'll give Dr. Thomson Fontaine a little bit of time now to make his contribution.
Yes, indeed. Thanks again. I was, and of course, for the last caller as well, and for these very insightful thoughts that he was able to share with us and with the audience. I was thinking of the comparison of Dominica, and if you go way back into time as a keen student of Dominica history and an economist, having looked at some of the export numbers and the performance of the economy, you would have to go back. In fact, even when you go back as late as, do I continue or do I just allow the caller to go on
Thompson,
board here?
you feel like you want to yield to Lambi? Lambi, you want to take a call?
Yes, sure, by all means.
On the overseas line, caller, please go ahead.
Yeah, Mr. G, it's me again. Mr. G, Dominica has always been an agricultural based country for years. And here you have a prime minister selling passports and saying if it's not passports, then what? Now you have farmers coming to him and demanding, you know what, you need to pay some attention to our feeder roads. We need to plant, we need to feed our children, we need to pay our bills. We need production, we need to export what we grow. Mr. G, you know what he did? He peg-gassed them. I mean, he should be, Roosevelt Skerrit should be happy that his citizens are coming to him and telling him, you know what, fix the road. We are not asking you for handout. We are not asking you to send our children to school for us to build houses for. We are not asking you for handbags in the night. We are not asking you for money and we have to come with a red shirt and a line. No. And this guy is so dumb. He peg-gassed these people. But that is to show us how insecure Roosevelt Skerrit is. This man will do anything to protect all the billions that cannot be accounted for, Mr. G. And I give no apology of saying that. You cannot tell me your citizens coming to you and demanding better roads so they could help themselves. They could find their way out and have better their lives, and you're gonna peg-gas them. I mean, this guy, you can't compare him with nobody, Mr. G. This callers are right. Roosevelt Skerrit is just something. I don't know where Dominica got. I don't even know what to say at this point. It's just amazing, man. Thank you.
Yes, thanks a lot for your comments here. Dr. Andre, you wanted to add something here?
Yeah, well, again, the question is, the question is, how can you explain this gross divergence from previous policy of this administration? Where is it coming from? I mean, you had Edward Olivelle talking about his preference that no leader should serve more than 2 terms. Again, as I said, we only had 4.5 years of the James's administration. You had Rosie Douglas indicating that he planned to serve 1 term before going to Africa to continue the struggle for decolonization. And we have other leaders who believe that God, in his great wisdom, has given them the wherewithal, including weaponizing the police, to serve in perpetuity. That is wrong. And the cruel irony of all this is that you do have some religious leaders, not all of them, and not one can't, and they're priests in the Catholic Church who, quite frankly, have spoken against certain of the excesses of governance in Dominica today. So you can't just say it's the Catholic Church who is supportive of this thing. You have elements in all the churches. You have obviously brave folks. We have a program on Monday evening. Pastor Rodney, and his two other colleagues and so on. As I said, you have other religious leaders who've spoken out and so on. But the fact of the matter is, disproportionately, you have a number of them who maintain a stolid silence in terms of what can only be described as an egregious erosion of the rights of the citizenry, particularly those who have the audacity to say that, look, I don't support this. This is wrong. And quite frankly, in a democracy, at least in a proper functioning democracy, you need citizens to stand up and say this is wrong. How else will you engender change if there is someone who is not there to correct or to say that what you're doing is not right? This is the very premise on which we raise children, that you as a parent, you have an obligation to correct, to set a right path, to try to nurture productive citizens. Children don't belong to you. You are entrusted to guide them in the right way. And hopefully, in guiding them in the right way, when they themselves have children, they can do the same. And the process will continue with each generation. That is how you nurture a proper functioning community, based on caring, based on honest toil, based on hard work, based on decency, based on integrity, rather than on medicancy. So this goes to the very essence of a good citizen and the very essence of a functioning democracy. That there are persons who have the obligation to point out wrong when they see it and to give people summons, because in the most passive fashion, they are giving vent to their beliefs that things are wrong, and to believe that somehow you have the overarching authority to try to stop people from doing so. This is a sensitive measure of how far we have deviated from the principles of peace, order, and good government.
Yes, and thanks a lot, Dr. Andre, for that. Lambi, you want to take a call before I go back to Dr. Andre, before I go back to Dr. Fontaine? Let's take a
Yes.
call.
The caller on the overseas line. Go ahead, please.
Yes, Dr. Andre, I'm so sorry to interrupt your train of thought, but I just wanted to concur with what you were saying. Notably, I recall in the US when they were going through the civil rights movement. I mean, of course, black people were fighting for rights, the feminists were fighting for rights, women were fighting for rights. And there was a president in office, his name was Dwight Eisenhower. And of course, being in office, he appointed a Supreme Court justice named by Warren, and thinking that Warren would have made decision in his favor. As life would turn on you, Warren became one of the most salient champion for civil rights. In fact, in the Brown versus the Board of Education, it was Warren who actually led that championship. My point is this: people make mistakes. People make mistakes, and democracy is a process. It doesn't happen one time. And so let's consider, for example, in Dominica context, what happened in Salisbury. If a mistake has been made, clearly the people were asleep. Nobody was guarding the roadblock at that time. One must ask, what was the purpose of the ambush on the eve of the election? Now, clearly, I have said that before. One would support any government to clear the streets, as you said earlier, Dr. Andre, to not damage any property, to not block any. Okay, so they clear the street. So what is the purpose of tear gassing and bullets through a sleeping village indiscriminately, I might add, at elderly, pregnant babies, etc.? So my thought is, get a blueprint from other developed countries. Okay, we made a mistake. Let's just come on the table and say, you know what?
I think that was wrong. Drop the charges against the Salisbury people. Drop the charges against some of the opposers and say, let us sit at the table and look at a way forward. What else? We just came from Lent. We just celebrated Easter. We have a risen Christ, which is message is forgiveness and love. So yes, mistakes may have been, but so what is the point? And so my humble evaluation of this entire fiasco that happened in Salisbury, there needs to be some sort of solution, recompensation, or sanctions if need be. So what happened? I mean, the entire world is looking at the people that sleeping and was tear gas throughout the night. And what I would tell persons who perhaps do not support these sort of challenges may be thoughts is that consider, had it been your grandmother or your niece who is 3 months old, and now they're suffocating, consider it. And so I think that you're very correct that there are opportunities for growth. And democracy is not a solitude pillar. It grows, it's dynamic, it changes, and it gets better. And I think these programs are part of the machinery that can engage and invite all parties to decide, okay, so what do you think we should do? And bring parties to the table and let's look at a better way forward. I just wanted to add that little bit. Thank you.
And thanks a lot. Great suggestions, very good suggestions. I'm sure it's good food for thought. Lambia, I'm going to have to give Dr. Thomson Fontaine a few minutes to make his points, and then we can come back to you a little bit later on for some calls. Dr. Fontaine?
Indeed. Thanks, Mr. G, and of course to the many callers for their continued wonderful inputs into our very civil conversation tonight about legacies, about our current Prime Minister, his attitudes in office. You know, I spoke earlier about death by a thousand cuts, and the caller talked about one. I mean, what was done to the Salisbury people was unheard of. I mean, people sleeping peacefully and you attack them in their homes and later go on to shoot people for doing absolutely nothing. I mean, that has to go down as one of the great human rights abuses that has happened in Dominica, and which I believe people should still be held accountable for, including the Caribbean leaders who send their police forces into Dominica. But that is something I'm sure a new administration will want to explore further, because those things should not be allowed to go unpunished. But I wanted to go back a little bit in time, and the question was posed earlier about making the comparisons in terms of the economy. One of the notable things about Dominica's economy today, and in fact for the past 15 years under Roosevelt Skerrit, is that it has succeeded to grow by less than 1% a year on average. Mark you, for any kind of economic development to be notable, economies the size of Dominica should be growing by 6 to 8%, 7, 8%, for there to be any kind of impact on employment, on wages, on living conditions, on poverty levels. You need that kind of growth. So if you're growing by 1% for so long, it means you're really in a declining state, because you're not able to impact poverty. It means more people are joining the poverty lines. You're not able to impact employment opportunities. It means more young people, more suffering for them. It means you're not able to do anything in terms of improvements in people's wealth. So what that means, government has not been able to give much salary increases. So inflation continues to erode the spending power of people. So that even if you're earning $1,000 today, and you earned $1,000 5 years ago, it means that the amount you're earning today is really worth about probably $750 compared to the thousand that you had 5 years ago. So without the consequent increases in salaries to match inflation, you're becoming progressively poorer. And that's what's happening in Dominica. We found 1% rate of average growth. Now, I was making the point earlier as well that if you go back to long time ago in the history of Dominica, and I've been looking very closely at production figures in terms of what Dominica did, and a caller talked earlier about agriculture being the mainstay from Nane Canel. We had this constant drumbeat of agriculture, and I did a comparison in the 1920s, and the exports then was equivalent to several hundreds of millions of dollars in today's money. So it means that if you were to compare not only the more recent past, on the Edison administration, the economy grew on average of 4% a year. Um, Before that, on the Mary Virginia Charts, a similar growth rate. So, looking at the performances, it is clear that in this current administration is worse, has worse performance of any living or prior administration. And that's something the Dominican public need to take note of. And it is reflected in the behavior of the government, so that the government, for example, finds that the only way out is to gift a home to people. Well, not gift them a home, to rent or to lend them a house, or lend them a house, because most of these people don't own those homes. They've just been loaned to them, which means it can be taken away. The Lord giveth and the Lord taketh away. So saith Prime Minister Roosevelt Skelly. So it is clear that these homes are not theirs. It is clear that that is the kind of tactic that the government has to resort to. Now, if you compare that to governments before, which provided opportunities for people and allowed them to own their homes because they had an input, they were making money, they had jobs, they could take off a certain amount every month and contribute, and it gives you a sense of worth, a sense of value. If you pay for something, if through your own sweat, the Bible is clear, by the sweat of thy brow thou shalt eat bread, not by someone else's sweat. There is something inherently fulfilling and satisfying as human beings, that you can create something, that you can pay for something, that you can own something, that you can claim to be yours because you put sweat and toil into it. There is something inherently empowering about this, in direct contrast to when you were loaned something, almost like you're a beggar, and you're told, hold on to that until such time that we decide what we want to do with it. That does not build your self worth. It does not build your self esteem. It does not make you feel proud when you sit around the dinner table with your children to say, yeah, I worked for this, and I built this and for my own sweat. It does not, you have no sense of worth. So in a way, the fact that this government has been able to do as it has done with the housing program is an indication of that. A movement away from hard work, a movement from toil, the closing down of so many businesses built up over so many years. I mean, there's a litany. Dominican Coconut Products, after almost over 40 years, Bellot and Company, over 100 years, they all of those different businesses that have shut down over the years in Dominica. The aerial tram, I'm just thinking of some of my head, and the countless local owned businesses, whether they're shops or different organizations like that, have been shut down. So we've moved away from this, and Mr. G, when you make the comparison carefully, you will see that this is a constant downward slide. And the most embarrassing thing, I would think, is the fact that this government has had the access to the most resources. So we've had less for the most. A government that has had access to so many resources. I talked about Pierre Charles earlier. He never had this level of resources, but even then, the economy performed better. So you see a situation where this government has an access to literally billions of dollars. No other government have had this opportunity to have had so much resources, and yet in terms of how they've been able to translate this amount, we have the worst performance. So it is clear that there is a crisis of governance in Dominica, and it's clear that the time I believe has run out for this administration, and they should really start to make way as the elections come nigh by giving us the electoral reform, clean up the voters list, by de-escalating the political tensions on the island, by freeing up the opposition, allowing people to speak their minds, allowing democracy to bloom in Dominica, by allowing Dominicans to unite as one. That all of those things will take place as we move forward.
Yes, Dr. Andre. Dr. Thomson Fontaine introduced this question of values. I mean, and you can see in another era, people used to work and toil and sweat for what they wanted to have, right? And so clearly, we somehow this sort of value is not being perpetuated or encouraged now. I mean, if we're giving people little handouts in the middle of the night, how are they going to figure, hey, this value is more important because, hey, I don't have to sweat and toil and think somebody's going to drop something for me. And they don't even have to give my neighbor. All they do is give me because I'm going to be silent. I'm not going to say anything. I'm just going to give my support silently and so on. And I'm not going to disrupt anything. And so I get something. How do you see all of that, Dr. Andre, compared to the kind of values that existed under LeBlanc and Barron and James and all these other folks before that?
Well, it's an issue that has come up over and over again, and it goes to that same old saying that it's better to teach a man to fish than to give him fish on a daily basis, whether it's balau, as sawa enjoys every day, or whether it's some other type of fish. Because the essence of survival is to work, to provide for yourself and for your family. We have been nurtured on a bedrock of values that it is by your breath, the sweat of your brow, as Thomson has put it so eloquently, that you succeed. You work hard to obtain a scholarship. You work hard to pass your examinations. You work hard to succeed at your business. That is what makes a good citizen, and that's what makes a country. Where those countries where the work ethic has been developed to its fullest, it is not surprising that they've outdone others who, quite frankly, rest for 6 hours and work for 2. And that is what we have tried to transmit from one generation to the other. You have this inner potential. And the parable of the sower is based precisely on that. The parable of the prodigal son is based on that. If you squander what you've been left, you must come home begging and looking for support. We have been taught those lessons in different forms from generation to generation. So to try to inculcate a value system that represents a negation or an abortion or an eradication of that value system, you are retrogressing, you're not progressing. That is a journey of no return because it will catch up with you. Now, obviously, everyone needs help. And certainly the good book gives us examples of persons who've been helped, but they've been helped to make them good or whole so they can provide for themselves. And that is the essence of statecraft. It's the essence of a government based on peace, based on good government, and based on the values that Sparrow talked about in his famous Calypso. How do you become a good citizen? And again, if we're not fostering that, quite frankly, again, the prospects look bleak. Fortunately, and I stand on the side of Thomson, that we do not have the luxury of thinking that all is lost. We have to follow the example, or we have to be inspired by someone, for example, such as Jimmy Cliff. I know, Mr. G, that you've played one of his songs, The Price of Peace, and certainly Matt Peltier has done the same. But there are other songs where he preached a gospel of prosperity, a gospel of eternal hope. If you play one of his songs called Better Days Are Coming, then that philosophy literally oozes from his lyrics. If you play that other song of his, I Can See Clearly Now, here is someone who is looking beyond the darkness, who is looking beyond his immediate circumstances, who is looking beyond the disabilities that may afflict him, to embrace a vision where the crops are aplenty and where he can provide for his or her family. And that's how we have to keep that vision.
Yeah, but Dr. Andre, before I let you go, I mean, have you seen an era where there has been so much divisiveness, so much victimization, so much where brother against brother and sister against? I mean, have we ever seen that before? Where did all that come from? People used to get along so much better in Dominica before.
There's no mystery to where it comes from, Mr. G. If you're trying to protect your real garden gains, if you're trying to protect the life you live in red carpeted splendor, fortified by $65,000 a month, if you're trying to live on the excesses of Macau, the cutting of cakes with would-be criminals, if that is the be-all and the end-all to statecraft, then there is no mystery as to where that philosophy came from. It didn't come from Edward Oliver LeBlanc. It didn't come from Patrick John. It didn't come from Mary Eugenia Charles. It didn't come from Edison James. It didn't come from O.J. Serafin. It certainly didn't come from Pierre Charles. It came from within. The demons you fight, the demons that are eating you, exist within the castle of your skin.
Let's take a little break. Let's go over to Lambi. Lambi, you want to take a call?
Yes. Caller, please go ahead.
Lambi, good evening to you and good evening to Mr. G and the team.
Good evening.
I think it's very important that we help Dominicans understand what is the role of government. Why do we want to elect a government? Because some people have come to believe that government is there to give them gifts and favors. But if there is no opportunity for being creative and for create wealth, then everybody is going down on that ship. So I think people need to understand why you need government. And so, the reason why this government is not interested in doing anything other than selling passport, they're not even selling passport. They give that out. they give that out to agents. So they sit back and whatever the agent give them, they try to use it to do whatever they want to. But they haven't taken the effort to go out and sell themselves. But it takes a lot of effort to develop programs. I mean, so you were part of government and you know the amount of effort, the amount of research, the amount of discussion you have to get a project presented and get funding for it and implement it. So I think it's just a matter of lazy. People in the head of government in Dominica did not want to make the effort to create opportunities for the people, and they believe they can hijack the people life by giving them handouts.
No, before you go, I want to ask you something, but I think I know it is calling. I want to pick your brain a little bit because we're talking about eras and comparing eras. We talked about the importance of agriculture and agribusiness. We have to talk about some of the things that Dominica used to do that we're not doing now. At one time, we had freshwater fish going on. At one time, we were doing all kinds of things that we're not doing now. I mean, can you help us a little bit if some of those things in agriculture, some of the initiatives that were being undertaken that are not being undertaken now in agriculture, in fisheries, and in freshwater farming and all of that?
Well, Mr. G, I mean, there are so many issues. A program that was going on in Dominica before that government came in. Look at fisheries. We
try to develop a fishing industry because, as you know, fish is a food commodity that's been consumed by everybody around the world. So what we did, we established a marketing system. We gave the fisheries division the first $1 million, provide them with the refrigerated trucks, and they had people on standby to purchase all the extra fish that was caught by the fishermen. We had people trained in Japan how to manage the fish, how to process it, and we provide different cuts to hotels and restaurants, and we started exporting fish. So fishermen had no problem in disposing their fish. And all we did, we take the weight of the fish, and every Friday, the fisheries division will send out checks. I know fishermen make $30,000 a week because the opportunity was there for them to fish and dispose of their fish. Remember, we had cut off that fish selling in tails along the road and all that. All the fish from the fisheries division, and the fish sellers would buy daily amounts from the storage, and they would dispose of the fish. So that's one little program we had that could have been bringing in millions of dollars to fishermen. In terms of the banana industry was well organized. We sustained it to be giving about $40 to $50 million a year with about 2,000 farmers. But we know we could build on that and expand by bringing irrigation and bringing better management. So there are a lot of things was being done to expand our production of banana production. And as you know, we purchased the gift banana business. So we had control of the marketing in the UK, both the ripening and shipping and everything. We had control over that because we purchased that business. But most importantly, we established what a contract farming system where we find the market, we organize the farmers, give them what is necessary, and deliver to that market. And we had container loads of dashing going every 2 weeks, going out, because the farmers knew where it was being sold, they knew the price, and they went out and produced. And by those little action, which was just starting, we moved non-banana export from $12 million to $27 million in 4 years. And that could easily reach $100 million in the next couple of years. So you have to do the work. I said, get the right people, get the technical people to come out and do the planning, do the organizing, and you as government give them the policy, give them the drive.
Well, let me ask you one more thing. Here's one more thing I want to ask you before you go. There is something that we produce in Dominica called crabapes. This is the most delicious thing you've ever had anywhere. And this is something that is such in demand that every time Dominicans go home, when it's crab season and so on, they always try to bring crabapes back for them because everybody wants crabapes. Now, I've never been able to understand why we could not cultivate the crabs in their own natural habitat and have millions and millions of crabs out there and ensure that we have a lot of cottage industries where many people at home could be making crabapes all day long and exporting crabapes to many different countries.
Mr. G,
the
evidence is there, you know.
Yeah.
If you go to Donkey Beach, you will see a marine hatchery that we built with the technical support from the Taiwanese, because they do crab cultivation or crab breeding and development, and they assist us in building that top of the line research facilities that will give us the opportunity to go in there and hatch crabs and provide young crabs that we can give to crab farmers so that they can cultivate crabs. So the effort was being made. I mean, the technical support was there, and we were doing the programs. I mean, I know you know about it, and that, as you say, could be a signature product of Dominica, because Dominica crabback is better than anywhere in the world. I mean, you buy crabback here in the store, and there's nothing compared to what we have. So if we had this top of the line innovation, and you know what would happen? All the people we sent to train would find jobs, because you will need marine biologists, you will need chemists, you will need all the technical professionals who would find jobs back in Dominica as you implement those industries. So everybody will win, you know. So yes, crabs can be a big seller for Dominica, We have the food source, we have the water, and we could look at do our wildlife. We could do things like agouti breeding. We could do we had started our prawn farming. We did all the research. We had all the techniques, and we had started working with individual farmers to implement programs for themselves. So there's a lot of potential in Dominica, but government must sit down and do the work. Not only I can get free money, go in and do the work to get Dominica moving.
Yeah, well, thanks a lot for that. Appreciate that very much indeed. Appreciate the contribution. I just raised that on Thomson and Dr. Andre. The reason I raised that, I know Lambi is going to take a call, so Lambi will come to you right this way. I raised that because I can see so many little things that you can do. I mean, there's no reason to have a crab season. You could have cultivated crabs all year round. I have millions of crabs and I have many people at home just making crab backs, making a set of money from that. Crab backs sell for $10 and $15 for one. Lambi, let's go over to you to take a quick call or two.
Yeah, the patient call on the line. Please go ahead.
Good evening, Lambi. Good evening, Mr. G, and
Yeah, good evening.
Whoever else is on the panel.
Dr. Andre and Dr. Thomson.
I listened carefully to Dr. Fontaine, Dr. Thomson Fontaine, and he spoke about the hotels and all that, investing in these hotels. But I want to bring up something which I find very ridiculous. The Kingdom of Morocco gives this government a hotel gratis, builds it for them, and to this day, many years later, it has not opened. But yet, this same government gives away 14 acres of parkland close to where that same gift was built and gives citizenship for sale to a group of people, whoever they are, we're not even sure who, but they do build a hotel called the Kempinski. So you get a gift and it fails, it never opens, but then you use your passport money. That is how we commonly know it. They don't like us to say that, but you use the sale of passport money to build another one. Is there any logic behind that? I am trying to figure it out. And then it brings to mind also the coffee plant that was given by President Chavez, built by the Venezuelan Navy, and to this date, not one bean of coffee has been ground in there. I mean, this is not a very good record by any chance for any kind of administration, gentlemen. Good evening.
Good evening, and thanks a lot for that. Great contribution. Lambi, do you want to take another call? Okay, let's go over to Dr. Thomson Fontaine. Dr. Fontaine, you can see all these issues are coming up. We are making those comparisons between different eras. And what we're finding is that there's so much happening in certain eras versus other eras. When you think about it, I mean, all of the matters that are being raised at the coffee plant, I mean, now we're talking about an abattoir, and I'm not sure how far we've got with that. But it seems to me that I really believe that the private sector should be the engine of growth. And once we keep trying to get government to do things like taking over dom lectures and so on, and think government can run that, it never works. The private sector does a much better job. Yeah. So
yes, indeed. And Mr. J, I think it's the right thing to do, and I mean to have those comparisons, because I suspect that there are many Dominicans today who believe that the Sheridan administration is the greatest thing that ever happened to Dominica, that they're doing remarkably well. But when you look at it, when you look at opportunities that we could have to develop the individual, and that's why I spoke about earlier, denying people the opportunities to work by the sweat of their brow, to build for themselves. I mean, a coffee factory or hotel could provide opportunities for people to work and earn their homes. Be proud owners with this.
And Dr. Fontaine, if you would maybe lean back a little bit, we might hear you a little bit. I think when you lean forward too far, your audio goes down a little bit. All right.
All right. Okay,
Yeah,
so let's
that's
try
better.
that. So yeah, so it seems to me that making those comparisons very good, because we need to remind, especially people listening, that government should provide the enabling environment. I mean, you heard former Minister of Agriculture Peter Carbon describe the areas where things were being done. The prawn farms. You can still see some of those farms out there in the Climate area. The prawn farms that were built, different projects that were undertaken, the fisheries project that brought in thousands and thousands of dollars to individual fishermen, and of course to the fishing industry, and and different things that can be done. You talked about the crab back issue. You could extend that to harvesting of crayfish. You can grow those things, that is so much in demand that can bring so much money into Dominica. So there is no shortage of areas of enterprise, of industry that can bring money in the millions into Dominica. I have said in the past that this government is a lazy government for failing to do the hard work. And that is what you elect the government for. You elect the government to be out there working for you. You elect the government to be out there opening the factories, building the infrastructure so that people can get jobs. That is exactly what you need. You do not need a government to be giving you handouts. All you need, let them create the enabling environment. Let them put in place the infrastructure. I'm not even talked about our essential oils industry that can be a boon to the world. I've talked in the past about the vective, something as simple as vective, used in 70% of perfumes in the world. That so many areas, Mr. G, that we can focus on, that we can build, that we can allow individuals to now work. I mean, providing jobs for a population of 70,000 people, of which about 15,000 need jobs. It's not a big deal. It's not rocket science. You can have Dominicans, having access to a lot of work and a lot of jobs if only the government would do the hard work. But this administration, sadly, is not interested in that. It is very easy. They don't even have to print their own passports. Passports have been printed by God knows who. So at the end of the day, this government is laid back and the people of Dominica continue to suffer. And that is why we are talking tonight. That is why this program is critical, because it allows people to see the different sides. It allows people eyes, as it were, to be opened and to see that things can be done differently, that there are enterprises that can open, that can function to allow Dominicans to really earn a living and to make money in Dominica. And that is what is lacking in this government. If you put aside all of the record, just set aside everything else, what is lacking in this government is a keen interest in the people of Dominica, to allow them to develop, to allow them to earn, to allow them to have this pride of place that they can take care of themselves and of their families.
And Dr. Andre, I did not get to mention this to Mr. Carbon when he was on the line with us, but if he chooses, he can call back, because Mr. Carbon, I believe, works in agriculture in Florida. And I know for a fact that they have done some work, and you can get coconut trees that are about 3 feet tall, and you get endless coconuts from them. Endless, very lovely coconuts from them, from 3 feet tall. And those things, you don't get extra tall, and you get hundreds and hundreds of coconuts from a tree. The fact of the matter is, can you imagine what would happen if we had a 2, 3, 4 million coconut trees like that in Dominica? And every day we're picking 1 million coconuts. And then what we do, we open them up and we pour them in it's 300 to 500 ml bottles, and we blast freeze it. You don't have to, and no additives, no preservations. Just like they do, there's a product in Jamaica, I bought them here. They blast freeze it, so it comes frozen, and then when they defrost, you have pure coconut water. This is a big industry that has so much potential because you're able now to grow them at very low heights. You don't have to climb big, tall coconut trees to get them. Love the water, Dr. Andre, your thoughts on some of those things here.
And you're absolutely correct. In fact, not only Mr. Carbon is an expert in the field, but I think there's a plant pathologist, Dominican origin, Osmond Barron.
Right.
Highly qualified. Obviously, there are people like Dr. Clayton Shillingford, who also had affiliations in Florida. I think he still lives there, who certainly can bring a lot to the table in terms of improving those crops to make them more marketable. But do we have the will to go down that road? Or have we set our sights on things that are easier to achieve? Easier in the sense of little effort, irrespective of whatever moral boundaries are crossed. And it is reminiscent of that song, this calypso a few years ago. They want it now, they don't want to work for it. Is it that we are preferring items such as the sale of passports that fill the personal coffers to a greater extent than other items that fill the state coffers? Is that what plagues us as we speak? Is it a matter of the good, me, myself, and I, or we, the community? Is that the philosophy that unfortunately has straddled us as if it is a Sukiya or something? Is that basically where we are now? You know, that it is not so much building the community, it's building our individual portfolios. Is that the devil that is riding us as we speak? I know that it has been said that the government shouldn't be giving handouts. In a sense, they shouldn't, but they should be given a number of things. Thomson has made reference to the fact that they certainly should be giving or creating the nurturing environment. They should be giving hope to citizens. They should be giving direction to citizens. They should be giving encouragement, whether through the provision of fertilizers, the provision of training programs whatsoever. They should be giving stimulus packages to those in need. Now, somebody might say, oh, well, where are we getting money to give anybody? But when international organizations have given you money to give stimulus packages, particularly in the advent of COVID-19, and you don't give it, well, actually, I should qualify that. You give it in brown paper bags to those who think support you politically. Where the same organization has given you millions to provide to your small businesses, and you divert it. Where another head of government has given you money for the Kalitago territory, and you can't account for it. What are you giving to your people? Are you giving them love? Are you giving them dignity? Are you giving them integrity by setting an example? What is it that you're giving? And therein lies the problem. That's it what separates us from many other countries. How we use whatever gains we get. Do we use it for the greater good? Or do we use it for a narrow oligarchy who are seizing every opportunity to enrich themselves at the expense of the resources of the state? Therein lies the problem.
You see, therein lies a problem, yes. And the thing is that we've done a lot of things before in other eras. For some reason, we're not doing none. And we ask if not passports, then what? So we are talking about the what? So we're talking about the coconut, we're talking about crabbacks, you're talking about, I mean, look, let's face it, I want to go over to Lambi now to take a little break again and then take a couple of calls. But before I do, I just wanted to say this, Dr. Fontaine. I mean, we live in a place where, you know, you go out to the supermarket and you see they selling pawpaw, half a pawpaw for $3, US or Canadian, whatever. Half a pawpaw, nice ripe pawpaw, but they cut in half and they put some wrap over it, you know, clear wrap over it, and they sell it for $3 or whatever it is. You know, in Dominica, you throw some seeds out there and it grows. What is the really cost of growing pawpaw? You know, why can't we supply a market with pawpaw? I mean, so many farmers and people could do that and make a lot of money from it. What I like about the pawpaw and the coconut and products like that is a high nutritional value, and the world knows it already. There are publications about all the value, nutritional value in things like pawpaw and coconut water and so on and so on and so on. Why not take advantage of that? I'm saying that If not passport, then there are many other words. And it seems to me if you were to divert some of that revenue from the CBI program when the going was good, and if you can still bring some of that back and do it now, you could definitely establish some major industries, some major agriculture projects, and major fisheries projects, and restructure your economy so you don't have to have this overwhelming dependence on the CBI program and the hotel sector. This is what I think is critical. So it seems to me that you must do that. You have to restructure, you have to diversify, you have to move some of that money away into the and manufacturing as well. And because certainly if Dr. Thomson Fontaine, you can identify 10 agricultural products. We just started talking about a couple like coconuts and, and so on and crabbacks and whatnot. And then you just tell people, okay, we're going to buy everything. We're going to set some money aside here. Because if you can find so much money to give people a commission for selling passports, you can find some money to say, okay, we're going to buy the farmers' products. And here are the 10 products we're buying, and we're buying all. So every week, just like we did when the Gizboat was there. Remember, the Gizboat took not only bananas, they took bay rum, they took all kind of things when they were going as well, limes, all kind of things. Why not just buy all the farmers' products and then export it? Because this market, go out there and do the hard work and establish the markets and sell the products. So that every week the farmers have a cash flow. Farmers would make tens, thousands of dollars. They can go back to building their homes again, buying the transport cash again as they did before. What is wrong with that, Dr. Fontaine?
But herein lies the problem, Mr. G, and that's why it goes back to the government, and that's the reason why I keep insisting that this government does not have the interests of the people at heart. Because if you did, if there was that empathy, that desire to allow Dominicans to earn well, the government would have been doing more. But instead, they choose to hide behind the sale of passports and do nothing to promote the interest of the Dominican public and to the interest of the workers in Dominica. And that's why I say, it is a very deliberate strategy to win elections, but at a tremendous cost. So yeah, they win elections because they can buy that support. But at the end of the day, the people are poorer, the country is suffering, people continue to live in droves. Our population, one of the only countries, in fact, Dominica is the only country I can say without any fear of contradiction, the only country whose population is on the decline, and it is not on account of war or some other natural disaster. Our country is declining on account of the behavior and the actions of a government that does not care about the people. It does not care about its people and doing what is necessary. And as I said, it is not hard work. These things can be done. Exporting of Dominica produce was happening for hundreds and hundreds of years. Dominica was known to be the number one producer. The boats used to come. They would come from North Carolina on a weekly basis into Dominica to ship up Dominica fresh produce into North Carolina on a weekly basis because Dominica was known as the number one producer of some of the best provisions, some of the best fruit. I've read on my Lifeline program where countries are boasting about there is nothing else, no better grapefruit, there is no better orange, there is no better plantain, there is no better dashing than what is produced from the soils of Dominica. And yet our people are languishing, our people are suffering from want because this government has failed to address this fundamental need. And the question that I have to ask the Dominican public, why do you persist with this government? Why do you continue to elect a government that clearly does not care about your interests? The Dominican public have done well for Skerrit. Skerrit is now one of the richest men in the Caribbean, coming from a person who, when he got into politics, did not even own a bicycle, I'm told, rented his first suit. Yet he's the richest man. The Dominican public have rewarded him. What has he done for the Dominican public? And why should the Dominican public continue to support such a prime minister? Why continue to support such an administration? When you think of the people of Portsmouth, Mr. G, who were denied an opportunity from Ross University that contributed 15% of Dominica's overall output. loss of revenues from jobs, loss of revenues from rental properties, and that these same people re-elected this government with even more votes. You wonder what is wrong with us. It makes no sense. How can we hate ourselves so much? How can we be so, callous or so disregarding of our own inputs, of our own value, that we will support a government that is constantly speaking it to us? I don't get it. I honestly don't get it. That's one of the real paradoxes of Dominica. That's one of the I say Dominica is an enigma. That's a big word to me. You can't understand. You can't wrap your mind around it and why people behave the way that they do. But when you think of, you know, people say it's similar to a battered wife syndrome, where the wife continues to protest to proclaim love for the husband even when she's been beaten day in and day out. You wonder how can she stick with this, the abuse that she suffers. But that's exactly what's going on with Dominica. The abuse to the working people of Dominica, the abuse to the young people, the abuse to the elderly people who are now being thrown $300 a month and in St. Kitts and Nevis with the same CVI program, giving the unemployed $1,000 a month until they can get on their feet. Because at the same time, they're providing jobs. But in between, they're seeking the job, they get $1,000. In Dominica, the elderly people get thrown a miserly $300. And they think that this is, hallelujah, thank God, this is the greatest thing to happen to us. Something's wrong with our psyche. And I think it's time that we begin to address this. I think it's time that we begin to understand that there is, in fact, a better way. We are going through a dark hour, Mr. G, a very dark hour in Dominica, and we need to reverse that. Our better days need to come, and they need to come quickly.
All right. So thanks a lot for that, Dr. Fontaine. Let's take one final break, Lambi. We'll go over to you. Let's take a final break to run a commercial. Take a couple of calls if you have to, and then we'll come back and begin to wrap it up. Over to you, Lambi.
Something whispers in my ear and says that you are not alone.
Nature Island Dominica Civil Liberties Foundation, Inc., Nidcliff, uniting our Kalinago and Afro-Caribbean nature islanders and friends of Dominica at home and abroad, coming together to help preserve the integrity of Dominica's democracy, human rights, and civil liberties, ensuring free, fair, and competitive elections on a level playing field within a system that guarantees freedom of expression, belief and association, respect for the inalienable rights of individuals and minorities, respect for the rule of law, for free communications media, and free from psychological, mental, and physical abuse of women, minors, the elderly, and young men. Our cherished island, the Isle of Beauty and Isle of Splendor, faces a crisis more serious than the COVID-19 pandemic or Omicron in its most contagious form. This crisis has compromised every institution of good governance. It has spread so rapidly that the Isle of Beauty is no longer rich and rare. Rather, Dominica has been brought to its knees by the actions of a few players who have abandoned the sacred and cherished value of our national anthem. All for each, and each for all. Nidcliff would like to help reverse this trend with your support. Go to our website at www.nidclf.org if you would like to make a donation, or contact us at nidclf@gmail.com. Support our radiothon, fundraising events, subscriptions, GoFundMe, and other initiatives to help raise funds to launch a legal challenge against the siphoning of public funds from the Consolidated Fund and other such initiatives and actions. Nature Island Dominica Civil Liberties Foundation, Inc., Nidcliff, working to help unify and build Dominica and our Afro-Caribbean and Kalinago brothers and sisters at home and abroad. Nidcliff, fighting to save our nature island, Dominica.
I am here with you, though far apart, you're always in my heart, but you are not alone. Oh, whisper the words and I'll come running. And girl, you know that I'll be there.
All right, so let's try to wrap it up now if we can, because it's already the 10 o'clock hour, Dr. Andre and Dr. Fontaine. Maybe while we're wrapping up, if there's any other calls, Lambi can interrupt us to take them. But basically, I think we've come full circle. I think we've made the point in the comparisons of all of the different shows, programs that we've had. We looked at Frank Barron, we looked at Edward Leblanc, we looked at Patrick John and O.J. Seraphine, Eugenia Childs, Edison James, and we've now looked at Rosie Douglas, Pierre Charles, and now Prime Minister Skerritt's administration in operation. What I think we can see is that elections have consequences and results matter, performance matters, because we've seen over the eras different types of performance and what it yielded and how it have impacted the lives, the quality of life, and the living standards of people. We've seen the different programs that were taking place and the policy environment that was created. We saw that in agriculture, in agribusiness over the period. We see what is not happening now, because we see that we've gone into the passport business, the CBI business, and focusing on hotels and infrastructure. The fact of the matter is the productive sector of the country, of the economy, is not happening. And so that is what is creating a real problem. We have a very finite situation with the selling of passports because it's going to come to an end. But we're always going to have the soil, we're always going to have the water, we're always going to have those natural resources and the natural endowments that we have. So the question is, why don't we add value and build on them to create the production and the productivity that we can export and earn from it, and allow many people to earn from it and make their lives better. The way it used to be when the farmers on the Lebanon, Eugenia, and so on, used to be able to build their own homes. They didn't need somebody to give them a home, and they could buy their own truck. They needed somebody to give that to them. The values system was somewhat different. And I'm thinking myself, we need to go back to that. I think it's time when we talk about a little thing like crab acts, somebody might take that for granted because you have people losing their jobs and getting arrested for crab. The fact is there should never be a crab season. I mean, we dealt with the Chinese, the Taiwanese, people who have all this expertise in those things. They do those things. We have experts in Dominica right now, at home and abroad, who are able to help us with that. We could grow so many millions of crabs, and we could have maybe 200-300 households, because many people all over Dominica know how to make very delicious crab backs. If they can make a couple hundred crab backs a day, that's a decent living at $10 for one. You understand what I'm saying? So the point I'm making is that there are alternatives to the if not passports, then what? The many other whats. And I think it's about time that we started looking at those things seriously, because the economy is really in very bad shape. Dr. Fontaine, I don't know whether you want to just come in and give me your thoughts on some of those now as we try to wind up.
Indeed, Mr. J, as we wind up, I think it's an opportune time to say that we need to begin to focus on this. And the number one thing that has to be done is to get rid of this administration. We've shown, I believe, conclusively that this current administration is the worst that we've ever seen in Dominica, that it is not benefiting the Dominican public by and large, that it is not working for us. And if something is not working, you throw it out and try something else. And that is where I think we are at. I'm very confident today that the Dominican public will, in fact, do just that at the next elections. We need to continue to push very hard for electoral reform, because it looks like this government is not relenting in that regard. They're doing their best. I mean, you would think by now, as the Prime Minister promised, that this would be the number one priority, electoral reform. We're already 2 years and counting into this administration since the last election, and there's still no reform. So we need to get this reform to begin with. And we need Dominicans have to take matters into their own hands and remove this administration. And when that is done, we can then begin the very serious process of doing all what we've talked about, enabling the agriculture sector in Dominica, linking this agriculture sector to robust manufacturing industry, to one that will highlight the tremendous resources that Dominica has, and not least of which is actually our people. Our people as critical to this whole effort. So I think it's time that we begin to move in this direction, that we really take this opportunity to I mean, really focus on getting rid of this administration. And that is what I would like to stress, Mr. G, and that's what I would like to stress to the people of Dominica, that they need to focus on getting rid of this administration, on putting new blood in the country that will focus on development and developing this country in a way that we've not seen before. I believe that this is possible. I believe that this can be done. And I also believe that now is the time to do it. And the way we do it is by realizing what can be, what we can be, what we can get, what we can develop out of this country that has been blessed of God by, with so much. I mean, the amount of resources that we have in Dominica, the amount of things that we have in Dominica is far and away more than we need to develop our country. So that's where I would like to end tonight, to just be very positive in encouraging people not to lose hope, but to continue to believe that the better days for Dominica are ahead and that we'll have those days going forward.
And thank you, Dr. Fontaine. Dr. Andre, the thing is, you've done a lot of work on this series of this historic series on the leadership and the performance and the legacies of all the leaders. I mean, you go back from Frank Barron right up to our current Prime Minister Roosevelt. You've seen all these eras, and you've seen where Dominica's economy has been, where its society has been, where its culture has been, and you know how the people have thrived, the quality of life and the living standards has been. And when we compare to now, the question people always ask, are you better off now than you were then? The fact of the matter, we're highlighting so many things that we can do that we're not doing. But instead of doing those things, we're asking, if not passports, then what? You know, I mean, so Dr. Andre, let's sort of, give us your sort of your summary of our discussion and where we are in terms of those comparisons between then and now.
Let's put it very simply. Real wealth is created by honest effort, innovation, by enterprise, by sacrifice, and by basically focusing on things that are sustainable. That has been the golden thread which runs throughout our recent history, from the 50s to the present. Every leader in his or her way has tried to focus on those things that are right under our very noses, as opposed to seek some illusory wealth in the form of passports. Let me give you a little example, something that stuck with me. Years ago, I met Don Christopher, and I know he had a reputation for being a difficult fellow, but he struck me. But we seem to have struck up a little friendship. I met him at a funeral, for God's sakes. And I was speaking to one of the local council, and he came up to the local council and said, "Who's this guy?" He said, "Ed Andre." And he said, and the first thing he wanted from me is if I could help him with a book, which I helped edit and publish. And we became, close. We had some legal matters we dealt with. And one day he brought me to his home. And he said, "You see this home, Dr. Andre? I went to England, to the greener pastures, looking for success and wealth. I found it right here in Dominica when I returned. And it's almost a parable on expectations. While we are chasing this wealth through passports, which is enriching a few, certain people, Mr. G, are making tea bags, soursop tea. Certain people are making tea bags selling mango tea. Certain persons are processing tamarind juice and selling it in cans. They're doing the same with cane juice. They're doing the same with coconut. They're doing all these kinds of creative things, and we have a competitive advantage or a comparative advantage because everything that you throw in Dominica grows. But you see, we have become so sophisticated. We've become so gentrified that these initiatives are too low for us. What did this fellow said? You are jealous of me because I'm now dealing or interacting with millionaires. Can you believe that? Isn't that a sad indictment? Isn't that a sad indictment on our mentality? That wealth which is right there, it is too low for us, Gaso. You want to deal with these millionaires out there, irrespective of how they've made their millions, and irrespective of the fact that many of them are fugitives from justice. That is what we've placed our stock on. And as long as we continue to do that, as long as we don't have a redirection, a refocus, a rethinking of that type of attitude, we are doomed. But fortunately, there are persons who understand these things. Unfortunately, there are people who are making their own contributions to right the ship of righteousness, to produce that which is sustainable, as opposed to that which is fleeting. And that is the salvation for Dominica. For us to focus on those things which have meaning. Years ago, Whitney Louis took me to his farm up at Syndicate, and I have never seen a landscape carpeted with fallen oranges like fallen soldiers. I have never heard the flutter of wings of parrots as they waited with bated breath to feast on that harvest which went wasting in Dominica. And yet we talk about agriculture as a dead industry. And yet we preach, if not passports, then what? We love passports because it fattens our pockets. That is the main attraction. I must ask a radio program, or is it a thing by Al Jazeera, as to what is the attractiveness of that type of endeavor, which is paved with bad intentions. And as long as we remain focused on that, then forget about the horizon. It is as bleak as you can imagine. But there is hope. There is hope because, as Ralph Gonzalez said, this initiative and enterprise is non-sustainable. It leads to nowhere. It's the road to hell. But we have hope because there are those who cherish freedom as opposed to servitude, as opposed to being ashamed of who you become and what we are. And we have to cling to that hope, because within that hope, within the bosom of that hope, lies our collective salvation. Good night to your listeners, Mr. G.
And Dr. Andre, I have to tell you thank you, and thank you, Dr. Fontaine and Lambie and Sheridan, of course. But I thoroughly enjoyed all of the discussions that we've had on the whole series, starting from Frank Barron right up to our current Prime Minister and his administration. I thoroughly saw the lessons that we could learn from all of those, and we saw lessons that some of the people who came after Barron, some of them learned some lessons from the and added value to what he did and the people before them did. And my hope really is that our current situation now, that we'll take lessons from all of that and stop saying, if not passports, then what? There's no sustainability in that. And we have been talking recently, we've coined this term about sustainability and resilience. where is the resilience if the people themselves are not resilient? If you have to be giving people little brown paper bags and giving them little houses and so on, I mean, where's the resilience? Whereas before you had people in Buffett who were able to buy their home, pay a mortgage for their own home, people were able to build their home in all parts of the country. This is more resilient than having to give people handouts. I think we need to go back and look at that again. But Dr. Thomson Fontaine is raising the question as to whether this regime can in fact do that, because it has this mindset on a different approach, a different way of doing things. I hope the mindset will change. I hope the mindset of the people will change. Now the values that we talked about, people will realize that there's greater value in working for what you want to accomplish. But what you need to do in order to be able to do that work successfully, you need an enabling environment in which to do that. You need to be encouraged. And that is a point I think Dr. Andre was making. So whatever policymakers that we put in office, as I said, elections have consequences, results matter, performance matters. And so whatever regime we put in place, we have to ensure that they create the enabling environment so that the people can help themselves and they can thrive and grow wealth. This is the whole idea behind it. And I think, as I think both yourself and Dr. Fontaine have said, Dominica has enough natural resources, that we can work with. Look, let's face it, all the fish in the sea out there is free, I'm going to buy them. All you have to get the right boats and train the right people, and in many countries help you do that. You guys go out there and you take the fish. You don't have to pay for them. You process them and you bring them, you sell them to the world. Have you ever had a nice dolphin recently? I think one of the best fish you ever ate. So the point I'm making, gentlemen, is that I really was thoroughly delighted for us to have done this. We have this, all the work we did this in the archives. I mean, we have this stored, and there's people who will be able to benefit from that, because many people really did not know that part of their history. Now we can make this kind of work available to them so they will know that their history, and we will probably, Dr. Andre, find a way to do something with that at some point in time to see if we can create something out of those documents there, because there's so much information. There's a wealth of information right there, and see if we can put something together on that to make it something available to the public in some way. And maybe Netcliffe could take that on as a project, and we could use that to raise some funds out there to assist the worthy causes that we're looking at in Dominica. So, gentlemen, I want to thank you very much with all my heart, and thank all of the persons who are listening to us and listen to us over the past few programs from the beginning to now, and all of the persons on Facebook and all the other platforms. Thank you so much for staying with us. I hope you learned as much as I did from these discussions. And I want to thank Dr. Andre and Dr. Thomson Fontaine again, and Lambi and Sherwin, for all the dedication, for being here and doing what we've done, and all the other people who worked with us as we went along, like people like Crispin Gregoire and Gabriel Christian and Dr. Dion George and all these other folks on these programs. We want to thank all of them as well. So, gentlemen, I just wanted to thank you again, and pleasant good evening to everyone.
Thank you very much, and I thank you to your listeners for being there in our hour of need.
Yes, very true. Very well said.
And Mr. G, just want to thank you for the opportunity and for spending those nights and early morning hours with yourself, Dr. Andre, Gabriel, at different times, different people, but just spreading this information. Last week we had Mr. Edison James, former Prime Minister of Dominica. It was very edifying for me individually, and then to go through our history like as we did and make those comparisons. And I hope the Dominican public are the better for it after those discussions.
But Dr. Andrew, you have to thank Dr. Fontaine in a very special way. This is a man who was up when we think we're up at 10 o'clock in the night. That means all 3, 4 o'clock in the morning for him, and he has to go to work probably at 7 o'clock.
True, because I keep forgetting that. I keep reminding myself that's why he's wearing his pajamas. It's very early in the morning, and I thank him for his sacrifice and his wisdom.
Yes, of course. All right. So good night, everybody.
Good night.
Take care.
Good night. Good night.
Take care.
Thank you.
Okay. Bye for now.
Okay, bye. Oh, you put it out. All leaves too.
Something whispers in my ear and says that you are not alone.
Nature Island Dominica Civil Liberties Foundation, Inc., Netcliffe, uniting our Kalinago and Afro-Caribbean nature islanders and friends of Dominica at home and abroad, coming together to help preserve the integrity of Dominica's democracy, human rights, and civil liberties, ensuring free, fair, and competitive elections on a level playing field within a system that guarantees freedom of expression, belief and association, respect for the inalienable rights of individuals and minorities, respect for the rule of law, for free communications media, and